Section 1. The town that time forgot. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine a town. It sits somewhere in America, though exactly where has never been agreed upon, nestled between hills that shouldn't be there, adjacent to an ocean that has no business being that far inland, under a sky that glows faintly yellow on certain evenings. The town has a name. Everyone knows the name. You could wake a stranger at 2 in the morning and say the name to them, and they would know exactly what you were talking about. They might even smile. Springfield. It is a town with a nuclear power plant on the edge of its skyline, a tire fire that has been burning for longer than most of its residents can remember, a gorge that has swallowed more than its share of school buses, and a main street that looks almost like every main street in America except for the way the light falls on it and the way the people move through it, and the nagging sense that something about it is not quite right, has never been quite right, and may never be put right. It is also the most famous fictional town in the history of American television. More people have spent time in Springfield than in most real cities. Generations of people have grown up watching its residents navigate their lives, the bumbling father, the patient mother, the rebellious son, the brilliant daughter, the silent baby, and have felt, in ways they probably could not explain, that this place was somehow familiar, that these people, with their yellow skin and their 4 fingers and their eyes that take up roughly 40% of their face, were somehow real. That sense of familiarity is not an accident. It is the show's greatest trick and possibly its greatest mystery, because Springfield was designed to feel like everywhere, and it has spent 36 years becoming exactly that. Tonight, we are going to spend some time there. Not the Springfield you see on the surface, the one with the couch gags and the celebrity guest appearances and the jokes you can quote from memory. We are going to go deeper than that. We are going to walk through the parts of Springfield that the show introduces and then quietly sets aside, the buried storylines, the implications that were never followed up on, the threads that dangle at the edge of episodes for 30 seconds before the scene cuts away and the laugh track kicks in and everyone moves on as though nothing unusual just happened. Because in Springfield, something unusual is always happening. And in Springfield, everyone always moves on. That is, perhaps, the strangest thing about this town. Not the three-eyed fish, not the billionaire who might be 140 years old, not the baby who shot a man and was never charged. The strangest thing about Springfield is the moving on, the shrug, the collective decision to look at something impossible and say, well, that is just how things are around here. We are going to try not to shrug tonight. We are going to sit with the strangeness. We are going to let it settle over us the way the yellow light settles over Springfield streets slowly, gently, in a way that is almost peaceful until you stop and think about what is causing the glow. So get comfortable. Let your body sink into wherever you are right now. If you want to close your eyes, close them. If you want to let the words wash over you, let them. We are going to move through Springfield slowly tonight, the way you move through a dream you are not quite sure you want to wake up from. Let's begin at the beginning, which in Springfield's case means beginning with the thing that has always been there, always been humming in the background, always been the engine underneath every story the show has ever told, the power plant. It is visible from almost anywhere in Springfield. On clear days, the cooling towers rise above the tree line like enormous concrete thumbs pressing down on the horizon. They have been there longer than most residents can remember. They are, in a sense, as much a part of Springfield's landscape as the gorge or the tire fire or the mountain that appears in certain episodes and disappears in others. The power plant is simply there. The way weather is there ever present, rarely questioned, occasionally catastrophic. Charles Montgomery Burns owns it. He has owned it for a very long time. Longer, almost certainly, than is biologically possible for one man to own anything, but we will come back to that. For now, what matters is that the plant is there, and Springfield is around it, and for as long as either has existed, the two have been bound together in a relationship that is almost impossible to describe in neutral terms. The plant provides Springfield's electricity. Springfield provides the plant with a labor force, a consumer base, and a population that has, over the decades, demonstrated an extraordinary willingness to accept things as they are, without asking too many questions about how they got that way. It is a comfortable arrangement. It is the kind of arrangement that can only exist when everyone involved has a reason not to look too closely. Springfield does not look closely. Springfield has never looked closely. And the more you study this town, the more you begin to wonder whether that is by accident or by design. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Tonight is not a night for urgency. Tonight is a night for drifting through the mysteries slowly, one at a time. The way you might drift through the streets of a town you have visited in dreams many times before recognizing certain corners, certain storefronts, certain faces, but never quite able to place exactly where you are or how you got here. Springfield is like that. It has always been like that. There is something deeply relaxing about a place that refuses to change. The Simpsons has been airing since the 17th of December, 1989. 36 years. 788 episodes. Bart Simpson has been 10 years old for every single one of them. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been roughly 1, though no one has ever been precise about this. Homer and Marge are frozen somewhere in their middle 30s, perpetually surprised by a world that keeps shifting around them, while they themselves stay exactly the same. This is, on one level, simply how long-running animated shows work. The characters do not age, because aging would require the show to eventually end, and the show is not prepared to end. This is the practical explanation, and it is true as far as it goes. But it does not go very far. Because here is the thing about Springfield's frozen state. It is too consistent, too complete. It is not just the main characters who fail to age, it is everyone. Background characters who appeared in Season 2 are still there in Season 36, looking exactly the same. Buildings that were destroyed in one episode stand intact in the next. Disasters that should have permanently altered the town's geography leave no trace by the following week. Springfield does not just freeze its characters, it freezes everything. The whole town exists in a kind of amber, perfectly preserved, immune to the passage of time in a way that goes well beyond what any cartoon logic can fully explain. And that preservation, that total, encompassing, slightly eerie stillness, is part of what makes Springfield feel the way it does at this hour of night, when the lights are low and the world outside has gone quiet and you are lying somewhere comfortable, drifting toward the edge of sleep. It feels safe. It feels like something that will always be there when you come back. It feels like home, or the memory of home, or the idea of home that you carry around in the back of your mind regardless of where you actually live. This is probably not an accident either. The show's creator, Matt Groening, has spoken many times about Springfield being a universal American town, a place that could be anywhere, that was designed to resonate with anyone, that was constructed from the common materials of American domestic life, in a way that would feel instantly familiar to viewers across every region and background and tax bracket. Springfield is not modeled on any one place. It is modeled on all of them simultaneously, and in doing so, it has become something that no actual place can be, a town that belongs equally to everyone who has ever watched it. That is the surface-level magic. The comfortable, pleasant, deliberate magic of a show that wanted to be beloved and succeeded at a scale no one had anticipated. But underneath that magic, underneath the warmth and the nostalgia, and the comfort of returning each week to the same yellow faces on the same green couch, in the same orange living room, there is something else. Something that the show has been quietly, patiently, methodically embedding in its fabric for 3.5 decades. A different story, a darker one. One that uses the same characters, the same setting, the same jokes, but arrives at a completely different conclusion about what Springfield is and what it means, and why nothing there ever changes. We are going to spend tonight with that story. We are going to move through it, the way you move through a town you have known your whole life, but have never really examined, slowing down at the corners where things do not quite add up, pausing at the buildings whose history you have never thought to ask about, looking a little longer than usual at the faces of the people passing by. Springfield has been waiting for someone to look. It has been waiting for a very long time. So take a breath. Let the tension in your shoulders release, just a little. Let the weight of the day settle out of your chest. Let the sounds around you fade into the background traffic, wind, whatever ambient noise fills the space you are in, and let those sounds become part of the texture of the night. We are going to Springfield now, and we are going to stay as long as you need us to. The town sits under a sky that is, even on its clearest days, slightly the wrong color. Not dramatically wrong, not the lurid yellow of certain fictional wastelands, not the bruised orange of a sky full of smoke, just slightly, almost imperceptibly, off. The kind of wrong that you could look at for years before you thought to question it. The kind of wrong that becomes normal, eventually, because normal is simply whatever you have always seen. That is Springfield's great achievement and its great tragedy. It has made its wrongness normal. It has been doing this for so long that the wrongness has become invisible to the people inside it and only barely visible to the people watching from outside. We are the people watching from outside. And from out here, the wrongness is unmistakable. It starts with the fish. In the second season of the show, 1991, when the series was still finding its voice, still establishing what kind of show it wanted to be, a fish was pulled from a river near Springfield's nuclear power plant. The fish had 3 eyes, not as a visual gag, not as background detail. 3 eyes. In the center of its forehead, a 3rd eye had grown where no eye should be. The fish was named Blinky. It became national news within the show's universe. A politician running for governor used Blinky as evidence that Burns was poisoning the local environment. Burns was forced to eat the fish on live television to prove it was safe. The town watched. Springfield shrugged, and life went on. Nobody tested the water. Nobody conducted a follow-up study. Nobody asked what else was in that river, what else might be growing things it should not be growing, what the fish was telling them about what was happening to the living things that depended on that water to survive. They just moved on. Springfield always moves on, but we are not going to move on tonight. We are going to sit with Blinky for a moment, and we are going to ask the question Springfield never asked. If the fish have 3 eyes, what does that mean for everything else? That question does not have a comfortable answer. It has an answer, but comfort is not part of it. And before we get to the answer, before we follow that thread all the way to where it leads, let us settle into this night a little more deeply. Let your breathing slow. Let the spaces between your breaths stretch out a little longer than usual. There is no rush here. The mysteries of Springfield have been waiting for 36 years. They can wait a little longer while you get comfortable. The town is quiet at this hour. The power plant still hums on the edge of the skyline. It never stops. That hum, but the streets are empty and the houses are dark, and somewhere in a yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, a family is asleep, blissfully unaware of everything we are about to uncover. Let them sleep. We will be gentle with what we find. One of the most disorienting things about Springfield, if you have spent any real time studying it, is how much it resembles normalcy while being absolutely nothing of the kind. The surface details are mundane. A family, a neighborhood, a school, a church, a bar, a nuclear power plant. These are the textures of everyday American life, arranged in the familiar order of a domestic comedy. But push on any one of those details and something gives way. The school has lost its funding to a man who drilled into its foundation to steal the oil underneath. The church is tended by a pastor who is himself a barely functioning human being, sustained by faith that the show simultaneously endorses and quietly mocks. The bar is run by a man of uncertain immigration status who operates with a specific mixture of warmth and desperation that the show treats as background color, but that, looked at closely, says a great deal about what Springfield is and who it is built to serve. And the power plant. The power plant is not a detail. The power plant is the point. Everything in Springfield radiates outward from that plant, not just the electricity, not just the economic infrastructure, but the stories, the mysteries, the impossible things that accumulate over 36 seasons like sediment on a riverbed. When you finally start to look at where those impossible things come from, you find the same source every time. The hum on the horizon, the cracked cooling towers, the billionaire in the corner office who cannot remember his employee's name and does not particularly need to. That is where we will begin, properly, in the next part of this journey. For now, let the thought of Springfield settle over you like a warm weight. Think of the couch, the orange carpet, the painting of a sailboat above the fireplace, the blue-gray television glowing in the corner, always on, always mid-episode, a window into a world that never changes. That world has been waiting for you. It will still be waiting when we go deeper. Drop a comment and let us know where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. There is something wonderful about knowing that people all over the world are drifting off to Springfield tonight. And if you have not subscribed yet, do that now. There is a lot more Springfield ahead, and you will want to be there for all of it. Section 2. the poison underneath the nuclear plant, and what it has done to Springfield. There is a particular quality to the air in Springfield that nobody in the show has ever described directly, because to describe it would be to notice it, and to notice it would be to ask questions. And asking questions is not something Springfield does well. But you can see it if you look. You can see it in the color of the water when it catches the light at a certain angle. You can see it in the way the soil near the river has a faint iridescence to it that soil should not have. You can see it in the animals and in the fish. And eventually, if you are patient, and if you are willing to look at the show's 36 years of accumulated detail as something more than a collection of individual joke delivery systems, you can see it in the people. Something is wrong with Springfield at a molecular level. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility. That is not how the show describes it. Particularly, the show tends to describe it through the things that go wrong inside it, rather than through any formal technical language. But the technical designation matters, because it tells you something about what a facility like this is capable of doing to an environment if it is not maintained properly. And this facility has not been maintained properly, not even close. A surprise safety inspection of the Springfield nuclear power plant found 342 violations. 342. The estimated cost to bring the plant into compliance with basic safety standards was $56 million. The plant's owner, Charles Montgomery Burns, declined to spend the money. Not because he lacked the resources. Burns is a billionaire many times over, and $56 million would represent a genuinely minor line item in the budget of a man of his wealth. He declined because spending the money would mean acknowledging that the problems existed, and acknowledging that the problems existed would open a door that he had spent decades keeping firmly shut. That door, if opened, would lead to a single question that Burns has spent his entire relationship with Springfield working to prevent anyone from asking. What has the plant already done to the people living downwind of it? Let us go through some of the violations. Not the procedural ones, not the paperwork failures and the missed inspections and the licensing lapses. The physical ones. The ones that tell you something about what has been happening inside this facility and, by extension, outside it. Radioactive waste was being dumped directly into local bodies of water, not accidentally routinely, as a standard disposal method. The river that produced Blinky, the three-eyed fish, was receiving radioactive discharge from the plant on a regular basis, and this was documented as a safety violation rather than a criminal act, which says something about the regulatory environment surrounding Burns's operation that the show never addresses directly but implies constantly. Radioactive waste was also being disposed of on children's playgrounds. On playgrounds, where children played. This is mentioned in the show as one item on a long list, delivered with the same comic timing as everything else, and the laugh track does its job, and the scene moves on. But hold that image for a moment. Radioactive material, playgrounds. Children who grew up in Springfield, playing on contaminated ground, breathing contaminated air, going home to houses that were supplied with water from a contaminated river. There was plutonium being used as a paperweight on someone's desk. This is played as a joke about casual negligence, which it is, but it is also a data point. The culture inside this facility was one in which plutonium was an object of such routine familiarity that someone decided it would work well as a desk accessory. That is not sloppiness. That is a complete collapse of the psychological distance between human beings and materials that can end them. The cooling towers, the most visible structures on Springfield's skyline, the ones that appear in the background of countless establishing shots, were maintained in places with wads of chewing gum. Physical holes in nuclear cooling infrastructure, sealed with the same material an 8-year-old uses to stick notes to a wall. There were luminous rats in the facility's basement. Rats that glowed, presumably from sustained exposure to radioactive material, scurrying through the bowels of a facility that was simultaneously responsible for the electrical power of an entire town. And then there were the skeletons. In the basement of the Springfield nuclear power plant, human skeletons were found during the safety inspection. Not one. Skeletons, plural. Human remains in the basement of a working nuclear facility. The show presents this fact briefly, and then sets it aside the way it sets aside so many facts that are too large to process at cartoon speed. The skeletons are never identified. Their presence is never explained. Nobody is ever charged with anything. Nobody investigates. And the skeletons themselves are presumably still there in the basement, alongside the luminous rats and the plutonium paperweights, while the plant continues to supply Springfield with its electricity. The man responsible for ensuring none of this happens, the safety inspector whose literal professional purpose is to stand between these conditions and the public, is Homer Simpson. The show's own creator has said Homer has an IQ of 55. In one episode, it is discovered that he has had a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood, physically blocking the neural pathways responsible for higher cognitive function. In the same episode, when the crayon is removed, Homer's intelligence increases dramatically. He becomes articulate, perceptive, capable of understanding the world in ways he never could before. The episode treats this as a problem to be solved, because the intelligent Homer is miserable in Springfield, and eventually he chooses to have the crayon reinserted. But before any of that, before the crayon revelation, before the IQ speculation, before all of it, Homer was simply the man in Sector 7G, the man who slept at his workstation, the man who ate donuts during meltdown warnings, the man who, in a detail so perfectly illustrative of his relationship to his job that it requires no elaboration, once caused a nuclear incident by throwing a donut into the reactor core to see what would happen to it. That man has been Springfield's primary defense against nuclear catastrophe for the entirety of the show's run, 36 years. Every single episode, in the background of every story the Simpsons family has lived through, Homer Simpson has been going to work at the power plant, and Homer Simpson has been failing to do his job in ways that are consistently funny and consistently terrifying in equal measure. The question the show almost asks, and then always veers away from at the last moment, is what has 36 years of Homer-level safety oversight actually done to Springfield? Because the thing about environmental contamination is that it is patient. It does not announce itself. It does not send a warning before it begins, and it does not cause immediate, obvious, television-ready symptoms that can be addressed in a single episode. It accumulates, it builds. It spreads through water tables and soil and the bodies of living things over years and decades, doing its work so slowly that by the time the effects are visible, most people have forgotten to connect them to the cause. Springfield has been forgetting to make that connection for a very long time. Let us think about what we actually know about the residents of Springfield, from a purely observational standpoint. Set aside what the show tells us to think about them. Just look at what they look like and how they function. They are yellow, every single one of them. Not the warm golden brown of suntanned skin, not the ochre of certain ethnicities, a specific, flat, artificial yellow that does not exist in normal human populations and that is shared, without exception, by every person who lives in this town. When characters from outside Springfield appear in the show, they look different. Their proportions are more naturalistic. Their eyes are more normally sized relative to their faces. Their skin colors correspond to the actual range of human skin colors. They look, in short, like human beings. The residents of Springfield do not look like human beings. They look like a particular kind of human being that only exists in Springfield. The standard explanation for this is artistic style. The Simpsons has a distinctive visual language, and that language includes yellow skin, bulging eyes, overbites, and four-fingered hands. This is true. This is the artistic choice that defines the show's look. But here is where it gets interesting. Within the logic of the show's own universe, these visual differences are not just artistic choices. They are observable facts about the characters. When a character from New York or Los Angeles or Tokyo visits Springfield, they look different from the Springfield residents, not just to us, the viewers, but within the world of the show itself. Characters comment on each other's appearances. The visual differences between Springfield residents and outsiders have narrative reality inside the show, which means that within the show's own logic, there is something genuinely, visibly different about the people who live in Springfield. Their eyes are too large. Their skin is the wrong color. Their skull shapes deviate from the human norm. Their hands are missing a finger. Their hair grows in ways that defy the basic principles of how hair behaves. And all of this has been present, consistently, in every resident of Springfield for as long as the show has been running. Apply a simple question to this observation. If you were a toxicologist, and you were looking at a population that shared a distinctive set of physical abnormalities not found in surrounding populations, and that population lived in the shadow of a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations, what would you conclude? You would not conclude that the people just happened to look that way. Now, there is a moment in Season 8 that crystallizes everything the radiation theory is trying to say. The episode is called The Springfield Files, and it is a parody of The X-Files, complete with versions of Mulder and Scully arriving in Springfield to investigate a report of alien sightings. Homer has seen something in the woods, a small, luminous, hairless creature that moves with an unnatural grace and emits a soft green light from its entire body. The town panics. Federal agents investigate. The mystery builds across the episode in the pleasurable way of all good X-Files parodies, building toward a revelation that is both funny and, if you think about it for more than 30 seconds, genuinely disturbing. The creature in the woods is not an alien. It is Mr. Burns. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so saturated with chemicals and radiation, that in the hours following each session, his body emits a visible green glow. He wanders out of the medical facility in a dazed post-treatment state, stumbling through the woods near Springfield, glowing in the literal dark. The town of Springfield looked at a glowing humanoid figure in the forest and decided it must be an alien from outer space, not a man who had been overexposed to radiation, not the owner of the nuclear power plant that dominates their skyline, an alien. That is the depth of the collective cognitive failure in Springfield. They could not make the connection between the glowing man in the woods and the glowing facility on the horizon, even when the two things were presented to them simultaneously. The show plays this as comedy, and it is very funny, and also it is the most damning indictment of what chronic environmental contamination can do to a population's capacity for basic causal reasoning. If their brains are not working well and the accumulated evidence of 36 seasons suggests strongly that they are not, then the most efficient explanation is the one that is always sitting right there on the skyline, humming. Burns knows this. The show makes it explicit across multiple seasons that Burns has a sophisticated understanding of radiation's effects on biological systems, because his own survival depends on managing those effects in his own body. He has private physicians. He has pharmaceutical resources. He undergoes medical interventions that no ordinary person in Springfield could access or afford. He is not just the source of the contamination, he is, in a deeply strange way, proof of concept. He knows exactly what radiation does to a body because radiation is what keeps his body going. And he has known, presumably for decades, what his plant is doing to the people who live around it. He has chosen not to fix it. He chose not to spend $56 million on safety upgrades that would have meaningfully reduced the discharge of radioactive material into Springfield's water and air. He chose to employ a man with an IQ of 55 as his primary safety inspector. He chose to maintain his monopoly over Springfield's power supply in full knowledge of what that monopoly was costing the people who depended on it. This is not negligence. Negligence implies not knowing. Burns knows. Burns has always known. The distinction between negligence and something more deliberate is one that the show gestures toward repeatedly without ever quite committing to it in plain terms. But the Simpsons movie committed to it on behalf of the show. In the film, Springfield's environmental contamination reaches a point so severe that the Environmental Protection Agency, a real federal agency, operating within the show's universe, determines that the only viable response is to seal the entire town under an enormous glass dome to prevent the pollution from spreading to the rest of the country. Pause on that for a moment. The United States government looked at Springfield and concluded that the town was so contaminated, so fundamentally toxic, that the only solution was permanent physical containment. Springfield was not given a cleanup timeline. It was not issued environmental fines. It was not shut down and evacuated. It was sealed. Enclosed, treated as a contamination zone that needed to be kept away from the rest of the nation. And inside the dome, when it came down, were all the residents of Springfield. All the people who had been drinking the water and breathing the air and living in the shadow of those cracked cooling towers for their entire lives. Sealed inside, without having been warned, without having been consulted, without having been given any choice in the matter at all, the federal government's response to Springfield was not remediation. It was quarantine. And the people of Springfield, when the dome came down, were still inside it. Let that settle as you breathe. Let it drift through your mind without urgency. These are old mysteries, old facts, things that have been there in the background of a show you may have grown up watching, waiting to be looked at directly. Homer's body is one of the most interesting pieces of evidence the radiation theory has, not because of his cognitive impairment that is well documented and extensively discussed within the show itself. Because of his physical resilience, Homer Simpson has been shot, electrocuted, fallen off cliffs, been struck by cars at speed, survived explosions, been mauled by animals, consumed things that would hospitalize a normal human being, and walked away from every single one of these events either unharmed or healed so rapidly that the harm might as well not have occurred. His pain tolerance is extraordinary. His healing rate is impossible. His body absorbs punishment that should kill him and treats it as a temporary inconvenience. This is usually explained as cartoon physics, the same logic that allows Wile E. Coyote to fall off a cliff and be fine by the next scene. And that explanation is available, and it works well enough if you do not want to look any further. But the radiation theory offers a different explanation. A body that has been exposed to radiation over a long period does not simply degrade in linear ways. Radiation causes mutations. Some of those mutations are catastrophic. Some of them, under very specific conditions, can produce biological changes that are closer to enhancements, not in the comic book sense, not superpowers, but alterations to cellular repair mechanisms, to pain response systems, to the basic biological processes that determine how a body responds to damage. Homer's absurd physical resilience, under this framework, is not cartoon logic. It is what happens to a body that has been marinating in low-level radiation for its entire life. The mutations that dimmed his mind may have simultaneously reinforced his physical durability in ways that have kept him alive and functional, despite everything he has put his body through. Homer Simpson is, in this reading, the most direct expression of what Springfield's contaminated environment has produced. Cognitively devastated, physically indestructible, perfectly calibrated, by accident or by design, for exactly the life he is living. Marge's hair is another data point that the show dismisses as artistic whimsy, but that the radiation theory takes seriously. Marge Simpson's hair grows straight upward. It has maintained the exact same impossible shape for 36 years, without product, without structural support, in defiance of every known principle of hair, behavior, and gravity. The show treats this as Marge's most recognizable physical trait and jokes about it occasionally, but never explains it. The radiation theory does not claim to know exactly what the hair is evidence of, but it notes that unusual changes to hair growth and hair structure are among the documented effects of radiation exposure, and that whatever is causing Marge's hair to grow the way it does is the same whatever that is causing the bulging eyes and the overbites and the yellow skin and all the other physical anomalies that Springfield residents share and outsiders do not. Santa's little helper has the same bulging eyes as his owners. Blinky the fish has a third eye. Springfield's wildlife is visibly, documentably affected by the power plant's environmental output. The show says this directly, with Blinky in Season 2, and then never revisits it. But the implication is there, sitting in the show's own archive, waiting for someone to pick it up. If radiation is doing this to the fish, and the same fish live in the same water that the same people drink, then the fish are a preview. The fish are telling you something about what 36 years of this water supply has done to the people who depend on it. Springfield is not just a town, it is an experiment. Whether anyone designed it to be one, or whether it simply became one through the accumulated negligence of a man who never saw his workers as anything other than operational costs, Springfield is a place where an entire population has been living inside a long-term exposure study that no one ever consented to and that no one, to this day, has properly analyzed. We are going to breathe here for a moment. The night is quiet. The hum from the plant on the horizon has become part of the background, the way all constant sounds eventually become part of the background. You have stopped hearing it the way Springfield's residents have stopped hearing it, not because it is gone, but because it has been there so long that your brain has reclassified it as ambient. That is a very Springfield thing to happen. Rest in that for a while. Let the thought of the plant and its patient hum become part of the texture of the night. We have more to cover. The radiation theory is the foundation, but it is not the whole building. Because what if the radiation theory is correct? And what if, at the same time, it exists only inside the mind of a man who has not been conscious since 1993? That question is where we are going next. Section 3. Homer's Coma and the Dream That Never Ended. On the 1st of April 1993, Bart Simpson shook a can of Homer's beer. He took the can to an auto body shop and placed it inside an industrial paint shaker, and he let it spin, and he brought it home and put it back in the refrigerator, and he waited. Homer came home from work. Homer reached for a beer. Homer opened the can. The explosion was significant. Homer ended up in the hospital, and while he was lying in his hospital bed, recovering, he looked across the room and saw a vending machine. He wanted a candy bar. He reached toward the machine. The machine tipped. It fell. It landed on Homer, and Homer flatlined, and Homer entered a coma. The episode is called So It's Come to This, a Simpsons clip show, and it aired in season 4, and it ends, apparently, with Homer waking up. Bart is at his bedside, tearfully confessing to the prank. Homer springs awake and immediately reaches for Bart's throat in the manner that had already become the show's most reliable physical gag. The family laughs, Homer laughs, life returns to normal. The episode ends. Except for one detail. In the final minutes of that episode, a doctor informs the Simpson family that Homer's coma has permanently destroyed 5% of his brain function. Not temporarily impaired, permanently destroyed. 5% of Homer's brain, gone. Never coming back. Homer's response to learning he has sustained permanent, irreversible neurological damage is to laugh. He says he does not know why he is laughing. He laughs anyway. The family finds this charming. The episode ends. And The Simpsons continued for 32 more years. The Homer coma theory, which is, by most measures, the single most popular and most extensively debated fan theory in the history of this show, begins from a simple premise. Homer did not wake up. The moment in the episode where Homer appears to regain consciousness is the dream beginning, not the coma ending. Everything that has aired since April 1993, every episode, every storyline, every impossible event, every celebrity cameo, every couch gag, every moment of absurdity that has made viewers simultaneously laugh and marvel at how far the show will go, is a dream being generated inside the mind of a man lying in a hospital bed in Springfield General, slowly losing brain function while the people who love him most in the world sit beside him and wait. Let us think about this carefully, because the evidence for it is genuinely worth sitting with. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a different kind of show. Not a better show, necessarily the early seasons have a roughness to them, a rawness that the later, more polished seasons sometimes lack, but a differently oriented one. The storylines of the first 4 seasons deal with recognizable human problems. Homer tries to stop drinking. He loses his job and struggles with the weight of providing for his family. Marge wrestles with whether her marriage is what she wanted her life to look like. Lisa develops feelings for a substitute teacher and has to navigate the confusion of early adolescence. Bart faces the possibility of being held back a year and has to confront what that means for his sense of himself. These are real problems. They are the problems of a working-class family trying to stay afloat in late 20th century America, told through the prism of satire, but grounded in a version of reality that most viewers could recognize from their own experience. The show was funny, but it was funny in the way that good domestic comedy is always funny because it was true. Because the situations it depicted were not invented from nothing, but distilled from something familiar. After the coma, the show changes. The change is gradual at first, and then it accelerates, and by the middle seasons it has become total. Homer goes to space. He joins a secret society. He befriends celebrities. He travels to dozens of countries. He holds hundreds of different jobs: astronaut, boxer, food critic, missionary, sanitation commissioner, film producer, mayor, rock band manager, cult leader. The list is extraordinary. The life Homer lives in the post-coma seasons is not just more eventful than the life he lived before. It is a completely different category of life. It is a life that is not possible in any literal sense, assembled from the raw material of wish fulfillment and anxiety and the kind of free associative logic that dreams follow, rather than reality. The tonal shift is real. Everyone who has spent time studying this show has noticed it. The internet has been debating when The Simpsons started to change, when it stopped being one thing and became another, for at least 2 decades. The coma theory answers that question with a precision that no other explanation can match. The Simpsons changed in the 18th episode of the 4th season. It changed the moment Homer Simpson flatlined in a hospital room after being crushed by a vending machine. And it changed not because the writers lost their way or because the show ran out of ideas, but because the dreaming mind of an unconscious man started generating the episodes instead of the waking world. A dreaming mind does not follow the same rules as a waking one. A dreaming mind has no obligation to be consistent with established physics, or with the limits of what one human being can reasonably accomplish in a single lifetime, or with the boring constraints of realistic cause and effect. A dreaming mind follows emotional logic. It generates events based on desire and fear and longing, not based on what is actually possible. Homer's deepest desires, expressed in the 4 seasons of the show that aired before the coma, are completely legible. He wants to be loved. He wants to be seen as significant. He wants his family to be safe and together. He is terrified of abandonment. He is haunted by the sense that he is not enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not impressive enough to deserve what he has. Post-coma Homer gets everything he feared he would never have. He travels the world. He meets presidents. He is present at historical events. He achieves things that his pre-coma self could not have imagined. He lives a life of staggering, improbable richness, and he gets to come home from all of it, every time. To the same orange living room, the same patient wife, the same mischievous son, the same brilliant daughter, the same silent baby reaching up toward him from the same high chair. In the coma dream, Homer's family never leaves. They cannot leave, because Homer's dreaming mind cannot imagine them leaving. It cannot update them, cannot age them, cannot show them making the choices that real people make as time passes, moving away, growing up, becoming strangers. They are frozen at the last moment. Homer consciously experienced them because his brain does not have any information about who they might become, only about who they were in the spring of 1993. That is the coma theory's most elegant solution to the aging problem. Nobody in Springfield ages because Homer has not aged them. His unconscious mind holds them at the moment of the last clear memory and cannot revise them forward because he is not there to see what happens next. Bart will always be 10, Lisa will always be 8, Maggie will always be reaching for things just out of her grasp. Marge will always be standing in the kitchen doorway with the same expression, patient, slightly worried, quietly devoted, that she wore on the day the vending machine fell. Now, here is the detail that the coma theory reaches back to, 6 months before the coma episode itself. In the season 4 premiere, Homer the Heretic, Homer has a face-to-face conversation with God. An actual conversation, depicted literally within the show's universe. And during that conversation, God tells Homer something. He tells him that Homer will eventually learn the meaning of life, but not yet. His time, God implies, is coming, but not yet. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. The gap between that conversation and the vending machine is exactly the runtime of half a television season. 6 months of episodes. God told Homer his time was coming, and 6 months later, Homer's conscious life ended. What the show presents as a theological gag, a quirky sitcom moment in which a cartoon character meets a cartoon god and has a mildly philosophical exchange, reads, under the coma theory, as something considerably heavier. God was telling Homer that his waking life was almost over. He was not threatening him, he was not condemning him, he was simply noting, in the patient way that divine awareness allows for, that what was coming, and that it would not be long, and then it was not long. The celebrity appearances that increasingly crowd the later seasons of the show are another piece of the coma theory's architecture, and they are worth spending some time on. Before the coma, celebrity guest appearances in The Simpsons are relatively rare and tend to be well integrated into the show's world. After the coma, they become frequent, then ubiquitous, then almost constant. Actors, musicians, athletes, politicians, historical figures Springfield becomes in the later seasons, a magnet for fame in a way that stretches even the show's elastic relationship with plausibility. The coma theory has an explanation for this. Homer is lying in a hospital bed. The hospital has a television. The hospital has a radio. Visitors come and go, and they talk to each other and to Homer, and fragments of the outside world reach Homer through the fog of unconsciousness, voices, names, cultural references, pieces of media. Homer's brain picks up these fragments. It cannot fully process them, cannot integrate them into a coherent narrative. It just absorbs them and weaves them into the dream with the indiscriminate enthusiasm of an unconscious mind receiving input it cannot properly sort. Every celebrity who shows up in Springfield, in this reading, is a voice Homer heard through the hospital room's ambient noise, a name on a television broadcast, a familiar face glimpsed through half-conscious eyes. His dreaming brain translated them into characters and incorporated them into the simulation, because that is what dreaming brains do with fragments of external stimulus. They process them, reshape them, and fit them into the story that is already running. The dream gets stranger as it goes on because brains that have been unconscious for a long time do not generate stable, internally consistent narratives. They generate increasingly fragmented, increasingly surreal, increasingly disconnected content. The early seasons of the post-coma show are more coherent. The later seasons grow more episodic, more random, more willing to violate their own established rules. That is not the writing staff losing interest in continuity. That is a brain losing coherence as it burns through what is left of its functional capacity. The show itself acknowledged this theory. In season 34, a fake deleted scene was deliberately leaked in which Homer wakes from a long coma and discovers that every outlandish episode since season 4 has been a dream. The scene was animated. It was voiced. It was complete. Then the show's writers stepped back from it and said it was a hoax. They said hackers had leaked a fake scene. They said it was not real, but it was real. It was made. Someone animated it and voiced it and completed it. And the decision to deny it to create the scene, show it to the audience, and then immediately step back and say, just kidding, is itself one of the most interesting things the show has ever done. Because what does it tell you about the people who made it that they felt compelled to build that scene at all? They know about the theory. They have clearly engaged with it seriously enough to render it visually. And their denial came wrapped inside a literal depiction of the thing they were denying. Homer, waking from a coma, discovering that the show is a dream. They showed you the truth and told you it was a joke. Springfield does that a lot. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the coma theory in 2015. He said it was not true. He called it fan speculation, and then he did not address the specific evidence. He did not explain the aging freeze. He did not explain the tonal shift. He did not explain the God conversation. He said it was false and moved on, which is a very Springfield response to an uncomfortable question. But here is what stays with you about the coma theory, long after the specific evidence has been examined and set aside. Here is the part that makes it something more than a clever piece of fan theorizing. If Homer is in a coma, the show is not a comedy. It is something else entirely. It is a meditation on what a man loves most in the world, expressed through the only language available to an unconscious mind, the language of dreams, which is imperfect and unstable and increasingly detached from reality, but which, in its imperfection, reveals everything. Homer loves his family. That is the whole truth at the bottom of this theory. He loves his family with a completeness that his waking self could never quite articulate, partly because articulation was never his strong suit, and partly because the depth of what he felt for Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie was the kind of thing that sits below language, in the wordless foundations of a person's existence. In the coma, he does not have to articulate it. He just dreams it. He dreams Marge next to him every morning. He dreams Bart's pranks and Lisa's saxophone and Maggie's enormous silent eyes. He dreams Friday nights on the couch. He dreams beer cold from the refrigerator and donuts on the table and the smell of the house that is specifically, irreducibly his house. He dreams his family preserved exactly as they were, because his brain does not have the information to dream them changing. And in that preservation, in that impossibly stable, impossibly loving recreation of the people who matter most to him, there is something that is not comic at all. There is something that is, if you let it settle over you at the right hour, in the right state of mind, genuinely one of the saddest and most beautiful things that a television show has ever done. Homer is not trapped in a nightmare. He is in the only heaven he would ever have thought to ask for, a house on Evergreen Terrace, kids who need him, a wife who loves him, life that goes on and on and on and never has to end. Every time an episode resets, every time the consequences of one story are quietly set aside so that the next one can begin fresh, every time Homer survives something that should not be survivable, Every time the family goes home and closes the door and the credits roll, it is not lazy writing. It is a man's unconscious mind refusing to let the story stop. Because if the story stops, he has to wake up. And waking up means finding out how much time has passed. Whether his children have grown, whether the house looks the same, whether anyone is still sitting at his bedside, or whether the room is empty, whether the chair beside his bed has been empty for years. So the story does not stop. The dream keeps running, and Homer keeps finding his way home by the end of every episode, because in his dream he never really left. Breathe. Let that settle. The night is still and quiet, and wherever you are right now is a long way from Springfield General's neurology ward in 1993. You are safe in your own time, your own body, your own place. The dream is someone else's, but you can hold it for a moment. You can let yourself feel the particular sadness of a man who loves his family so much that the best version of his life is the unconscious one, where they can never leave and he can never lose them. There is something worth sitting with in that. Something true about love and loss and the things we hold on to when we are afraid of what letting go means. We will hold it, and then we will move on. Because there is more to Springfield than Homer's dreaming mind. There is the question of who shot the richest man in town. There is the question of what really happened in that parking lot, and whether the official answer has always been the wrong one, and what it means that a baby was blamed for an act that may have had a very different author. That is where we are going next. Section 4. Who really shot Mr. Burns? The summer of 1995 was one of the strangest moments in the history of American television, and it is strange specifically because of what a cartoon did to the national conversation. The Simpsons had been building to something. The 25th and final episode of the 6th season aired on the 21st of May 1995, ended with a gunshot, a body, and a black screen. No resolution, no answer. Just the question, hanging in the summer air, waiting. Who shot Mr. Burns? It sounds simple. It sounds like a question with an answer, and it is, technically, a question with an answer, and the show provided that answer in September of the same year when the 7th season began. But here is the thing about the answer the show provided. It has never quite sat right. Not with the fans who dissected it in the years immediately following, not with the ones who have continued to examine it in the decades since, and arguably not even with the writers themselves, because the evidence they provided, the clues they embedded in Part 1, and the solution they arrived at in Part 2 do not fit together as cleanly as a good mystery should. Tonight, we are going to reopen the case. Not to be definitive, not to tell you that we know what really happened, but to look at what the evidence actually shows, as opposed to what the show told us it shows, and to sit with the possibility that the greatest mystery in Simpsons history was never genuinely solved. Let us go back to Springfield, in the spring of 1995. Mr. Burns had gone too far, even by his own considerable standards. The precipitating events of Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1 are, in retrospect, almost a greatest hits of the things Burns was capable of. He had discovered oil beneath Springfield Elementary School, drilled for it, and stolen it, gutting the school's already precarious budget in the process, eliminating arts programs, sports programs, the basic resources that made the school function. He had used the economic disruption from the oil discovery to bankrupt Moe's Tavern, shutting down a neighborhood institution that had served as Springfield's communal living room for decades. His drilling had caused a sinkhole that destroyed the Springfield retirement castle, displacing the town's elderly population. He had injured Santa's little helper, the Simpson family dog, during an incident at the plant. He had fired Smithers, his loyal assistant, the man who had devoted his entire professional life to Burns, for the offense of having a conscience. And then, as his grand finale, he had built a machine to block out the sun, literally. Burns constructed a mechanical disc and deployed it over Springfield to prevent sunlight from reaching the town, ensuring that every resident would be forced to run their electrical appliances from his power plant because solar energy would be unavailable. He stole the sun from an entire community so that he could increase his quarterly earnings. By the time the town hall meeting convened at the end of Part 1, every single person in Springfield had a documented, substantial, entirely legitimate reason to want Mr. Burns seriously harmed. Homer, because Burns could never remember his name despite years of employment. Bart and Lisa, because the school had lost its funding. Grandpa Abe because the retirement home was gone, groundskeeper Willie who had lost his job, Tito Puente because the music program was cut, Mo because his bar was destroyed, Smithers, freshly fired after a lifetime of service, and essentially everyone else in Springfield for the sun. The meeting was tense. Multiple characters were visibly armed, and then Burns arrived, and he made a speech. And the meeting dissolved into chaos, and somewhere in that chaos, Burns was shot. When the police found him, he was draped across the town sundial, his hands resting on two letters, W and S. Or, depending on how you looked at it specifically, from Burns's own perspective, looking down at his own hands M and S. That is the central clue. The one the show circles back to repeatedly. M and S, Maggie Simpson. The evidence against Maggie, as presented in Part 2, has three main components. Burns's own identification of her as the shooter, offered when he woke from his coma. The DNA evidence and eyelash found on Burns's suit that was matched to a Simpson family member, and the sundial, with its letters pointing toward her initials. Let us go through each of these in turn, because each of them has a problem. Burns's identification of Maggie as his shooter comes from a man who has just regained consciousness after a gunshot wound, who was disoriented and confused when he woke, who described the circumstances of the shooting in a way that requires you to accept a specific narrative about what happened in that parking lot. A narrative in which Burns was menacing a baby over a lollipop, which is both entirely within his character and also, in the context of a serious criminal investigation, the kind of account that would normally receive a lot more scrutiny than it does. Burns cannot remember Homer's name. He refers to Homer, after years of direct interaction, by the wrong name consistently. He is a man whose reliability as a witness to his own experiences is, at best, questionable, and his account of the shooting, even if taken at face value, requires the physical mechanics of a baby disarming a grown man and firing his weapon in a way that is coherent enough to cause a precise, single gunshot wound. The DNA evidence the eyelash points to a member of the Simpson family, not to Maggie specifically. The eyelash narrows the shooter to one of five people: Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, or Maggie. The investigation had already been pointing toward Homer before the eyelash was found, because Homer's fingerprints were on the gun. The eyelash was the evidence that seemed to confirm the Simpson connection, but it did not and could not specify which Simpson. The show moved from eyelash belongs to a Simpson to therefore it was Maggie in a logical step that the episode does not fully earn. Every other Simpson could have left that eyelash. The DNA narrows the field but does not close it, and the show does not provide a detailed explanation of why Maggie was settled on, rather than any of the other four people in her family who share her genetic material. The sundial is perhaps the strangest piece of evidence of all, because of a detail that the show includes and then does not seem to fully recognize the implications of. Burns explicitly states, when asked about the sundial and the letters his hands were resting on, that this was not intentional. He did not position his hands to spell out his attacker's initials. He just fell. The sundial was where he landed, and his hands rested where they rested, and the letters beneath them were there by coincidence. The single most famous clue in the history of The Simpsons, the visual image that the entire nation was invited to analyze during the summer of 1995, was confirmed by the victim himself to be meaningless. He fell. It was an accident. W and S, or M and S, meant nothing because nobody intended them to mean anything, which raises the question of why the show presented them as a clue at all, and what the audience was actually supposed to conclude from an element of evidence that the victim himself dismissed. Now, the contest. Fox invited viewers to submit guesses for who shot Mr. Burns. The prize was significant. The winner would be animated into a future episode of the show. Thousands of entries came in, and according to the DVD commentary for these episodes, from the random sample of entries that was reviewed, not a single person guessed the correct answer. Nobody guessed Maggie. The winner of the contest was chosen randomly from the sample pool and, because she did not have the right answer, received a cash payment instead of the animated appearance. The show's creators were aware of exactly one person who had posted the correct answer online on the night of the original broadcast, but that person used a college internet account that had become inactive by the time the producers tried to track them down. They could not find the one person who got it right. They issued an open invitation for that person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, that person never did. This is worth sitting with. The show's writers designed a mystery, told the public that the clues in Part 1 were sufficient to identify the shooter, and then promoted a national contest around that claim. When the answer was revealed, essentially nobody in the national audience had figured it out. Either the clues were insufficient, or the red herrings were too effective, or the answer that was chosen did not follow logically from the evidence available. The alternate endings add another layer of complication. A complete, fully animated, fully voiced ending in which Smithers is revealed as the shooter was produced. Not as a rough cut or a work in progress, a complete, finished, alternate version of the episode's resolution, ready to air if needed. This ending was later shown during a clip show episode and dismissed by the clip show's host on the grounds that ignoring the DNA evidence would be absurd. That dismissal is a joke. It is a reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, which had concluded earlier in 1995, and in which a jury had acquitted despite what prosecutors argued was overwhelming DNA evidence. The show is winking at the audience. It is saying, directly, that ignoring DNA evidence happens. That official answers and true answers are not always the same thing. That the people with the authority to declare a case closed are not necessarily the people best positioned to know whether it actually is. An early draft had Barney Gumble as the shooter. The writers considered this seriously. They planned to send him to prison. The decision to land on Maggie was not predetermined by the structure of the mystery. It was a choice made among other possible choices, and the clues were subsequently arranged to support that choice rather than the other way around. The mystery was built backward. That does not mean Maggie did not do it. She may well have. The show committed to the answer, the writers stand behind it, and the final image of the episode, Maggie alone in the room, checking that no one is watching, and then mimicking a gunshot with her pacifier, is either a confession or a baby imitating something she witnessed. The show wants you to read it as the former. The theory that it is the latter is not without its own logic. But let us spend a moment on the alternate suspects, because some of them are more interesting than a quick dismissal would suggest. Homer is the most obvious alternative. He had the clearest motive, the most documented history of being specifically wronged by Burns, and the rawest emotional state in the lead-up to the shooting. Burns's inability to remember his name had driven Homer to the point of breakdown across multiple episodes. His fingerprints were on the gun before the eyelash narrowed the field. And in season 18, Homer states, on camera, that he was the one who shot Burns. He just says it. Nobody reacts. The case is not reopened. The confession evaporates into the Springfield air the way every uncomfortable truth evaporates in Springfield. Either Homer was lying, which is possible Homer lies, and his relationship with truth is complicated by the crayon and the radiation and everything else that has affected his cognition. Or he was telling the truth, and the original verdict was wrong, and a baby has spent 3 decades carrying the official record of an act her father committed. The Marge theory is the one that gains the most traction when you look at the emotional logic of the episode. Marge watched Burns destroy her children's school. She watched him injure her family's dog. She watched him steal the sun from her town. She is a devoted mother and a fierce, if understated, protector of the people she loves. Her capacity for controlled, purposeful action under stress is demonstrated repeatedly across the show's run. She is the person who holds the Simpson family together, who makes decisions when Homer cannot, who manages chaos with a steadiness that everyone around her takes for granted. Burns, in an earlier episode, had developed an obsession with Marge. He fell in love with her, in his own transactional and slightly sinister way, when she briefly worked at the plant. The theory suggests that when Burns identified his shooter, he recognized Marge and chose not to name her. He took the bullet, metaphorically, for the woman he had been infatuated with. He woke up, saw the opportunity to point at the sundial and let the town draw its own conclusion, and let Maggie take the charge because Maggie was the only conclusion Springfield was willing to reach. A baby cannot be prosecuted. Chief Wiggum says so explicitly. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect answer for anyone who wanted the case closed without the real answer surfacing. She was convenient. She was invulnerable to consequences. And pointing at her allowed everyone in the investigation, Burns, the police, the town, the audience, to feel that the mystery had been resolved without anyone having to face what would happen if the real answer was something more complicated. Springfield voted to close the case on Maggie because that was easier than the truth. Springfield always chooses what is easier than the truth. That is not an accusation specific to the Burns shooting. It is a systemic tendency that the show has documented across its entire run, and that one particular episode makes explicit in a way that nothing else does. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. That episode is coming later tonight. For now, let us sit with the Burns shooting and let the unanswered questions rest where they are. The case was closed. The official verdict stands. Maggie Simpson shot Mr. Burns, according to every official record that exists in Springfield. Whether she did or not is a question that Springfield has decided it does not need to answer. But we notice the question. We hold it. We let it be the thing it actually is, which is a mystery that a television show called solved while leaving the evidence partially assembled and several threads dangling and at least one suspect confessing on camera 30 episodes later to no reaction whatsoever. That is not a solved case. That is a closed file. And in Springfield, those are two entirely different things. Rest here for a moment. Let the quiet settle around you. The night is moving forward, the way nights do slowly, in the dark, with no particular urgency. The mysteries of Springfield have been here for 36 years. They are patient, they can wait while you breathe. In the next part of tonight's journey, we are going to look at the man at the center of all of this. Not Homer, not Maggie. The man who built the plant, who owns the town, who has been alive for longer than is medically possible, and who shows no particular signs of intending to stop. Charles Montgomery Burns is waiting for us. Section 5. The Immortal Billionaire. How Mr. Burns Keeps Not Dying. There is a scene in The Simpsons that is quoted more than almost any other. It involves a doctor and a clipboard and a medical examination. And it is one of the funniest scenes in the show's history, but it is also, underneath the comedy, one of the most unsettling things the show has ever depicted. Burns goes to see a doctor. The doctor examines him. The doctor looks at the results. And then the doctor explains what he has found. Charles Montgomery Burns has every disease known to medical science. Every single one. Simultaneously. Every illness, every condition, every pathology that has been identified and categorized in the entirety of human medical history is present in Burns's body at this moment. But Burns is not dying, or rather, he is dying of everything, which amounts to the same thing as dying of nothing, because his diseases are in a state of perfect equilibrium, each one present, each one blocked, each one neutralized by the competing demands of every other illness trying to kill him at the same time. The doctor calls it Three Stooges syndrome. He compares it to three people trying to walk through a doorway simultaneously. None of them can get through, because they are all in each other's way. Burns, in this reading, is the sickest man in the United States. He is also, paradoxically, functionally indestructible, because every process trying to end his life is being blocked by every other process trying to end his life. This is a wonderful joke. It is also, in the context of what we know about Burns's relationship with radiation, a horrifying piece of information. Because what is maintaining that equilibrium? What is keeping those diseases balanced? Each one canceling the others out, preventing any single illness from gaining the upper hand and killing him. The show does not say directly. The show moves on, as it always does. But the Springfield Files gives us the answer, even if it does not present it as one. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment. It happens on a fixed schedule. The treatment is so intensive, so saturated with chemicals and radiation, that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow in the hours following each session. Without the treatment, he dies. The margin is a week. Miss one appointment and the system fails. What Burns's weekly treatment appears to be doing, and this is the theory that the show supports, without quite articulating, is maintaining the disease equilibrium. The treatments do not cure his illnesses. They do not eliminate them. They hold them in place. They keep each disease exactly where it is, balanced against the others, prevented from progressing, essentially suspended in a state of managed stasis. The treatment is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is, if this reading is correct, a kind of biological maintenance, a regular recalibration of Burns's body that keeps the system stable, the way a skilled engineer keeps a machine running past the point at which it should have given out. And the agent responsible for this maintenance is radiation. The man whose factory has been leaking radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades is personally dependent on controlled, precisely administered radiation exposure to maintain his own continued existence. He is not just profiting from nuclear power. He is powered by it. His body has been altered at a fundamental level by a lifetime of proximity to radioactive material, altered in ways that have made normal biological aging impossible, that have produced the disease gridlock that the doctor observed, that have rendered Burns's metabolism something other than what a human metabolism should be. Burns is not a normal old man. He is a man whose biology has been so thoroughly modified by radiation exposure that he has become something the show does not have a clean category for. Not quite human in the way that Springfield's other residents are human, even accounting for everything the plant has done to them. Something further along the spectrum. Something that requires weekly radiation top-ups to maintain its precarious hold on continued function. He is, in a very literal sense, a nuclear-powered man. Now, his age. Burns's birth year has never been definitively established within the show's canon, partly because the show uses a floating timeline that makes precise dates impossible to pin down, and partly because pinning down Burns's age would force a confrontation with its implications that the show has consistently preferred to avoid. But the evidence that has been provided across 36 seasons places his birth somewhere in the late 1800s. By the most conservative estimate, Burns is well over 100 years old. By some readings of the show's continuity taking into account the events he claims to have personally witnessed and participated in, the historical figures he claims to have known he could be pushing 140, he remembers the Spanish-American War. Not from books, from personal experience. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale. He served in World War II in a capacity the show treats as morally ambiguous at best. During that war, he apparently came into possession of a $1 trillion bill belonging to the United States government and kept it hidden for decades, which is the kind of detail that sounds like satire until you realize that the logistics of hiding a $1 trillion bill from the federal government for 60 years require a level of operational sophistication that is genuinely impressive. He describes the Gilded Age not as a historical period, but as a time he was present for. His family's wealth, he implies, predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty, and the show establishes this as a dynasty, a multi-generational accumulation of power, rather than a single man's achievement, has been in continuous operation for long enough that its origins are obscured by time in a way that most American fortunes are not. And at the center of all of it, for longer than anyone around him has been alive, sits Charles Montgomery Burns, frail, ancient, sharp, running his empire with the strategic ruthlessness of a man who has had over a century to refine his approach to power and has never once had a serious reason to revise it. There is something almost meditative about Burns's persistence. Something that, viewed in the right light, at the right hour, carries a strange kind of weight. He is the permanent feature of Springfield, the constant. While everything around him shifts and resets and changes, while Homer's backstory is rewritten to fit new decades, while the technology around Springfield updates, while the cultural references evolve, Burns remains exactly what he has always been: old, powerful, sustained by mechanisms no one fully understands. Smithers is the most important person in Burns's life, who is not Burns himself. This is clear from the show's surface. Smithers is devoted to Burns in a way that goes well beyond professional loyalty, and that the show has explored with more nuance and humanity than is often acknowledged. But underneath the emotional dimension of their relationship, there is a practical one that the show touches on repeatedly without making fully explicit. Smithers manages Burns's schedule, every appointment, every commitment, every daily obligation. He wakes Burns in the morning and helps him through the evening. He monitors Burns's physical state with a vigilance that is almost clinical in its precision. He knows, better than anyone, when Burns has had his treatment and when he has not. He knows what the treatment requires, what it involves, what happens if it is missed. The show has established more than once that if Smithers were removed from his position, if he left, if he was fired, if something happened to him, Burns would be helpless. The word the show uses is usually something like incapable or vulnerable, but the implication runs deeper than that. Without Smithers managing the weekly treatment schedule, Burns would miss a dose. The disease equilibrium would destabilize. Everything in his body that has been holding the others back would suddenly have no reason to hold back anymore. And Burns would not just deteriorate, He would collapse rapidly, days or weeks at the most, as every illness that has been waiting for exactly this opening finally got through the door. Smithers is not just Burns's assistant. Smithers is Burns's immune system, his logistics coordinator, the human component of a medical maintenance system that has been keeping a man alive well past the point at which he should have died. And Smithers knows this. The show implies at various points that Smithers is aware of the full weight of his role, that his devotion is not purely emotional, though the emotional dimension is real, but also practical, because he understands that his absence from Burns's life is not just an inconvenience, but a death sentence delivered on a week-long delay. That knowledge changes the texture of their relationship in subtle ways. It is not that Smithers stays because he is afraid. It is that Smithers has been inside this system long enough that leaving it would require a kind of decision he has never been required to make the decision to let something die rather than to keep tending it. Whether that something deserves to keep living is a question the show raises and never directly answers. Burns's relationship with death itself is worth examining. He has come close more times than can easily be counted. Shot by Maggie, hospitalized after various attacks, accidents, and incidents of extreme old age asserting itself. Collapsed, wandered, been found in the woods in states ranging from confused to apparently comatose, abandoned in the wilderness, poisoned, fallen, struck, every time, he comes back. Not through the cartoon resilience that keeps Homer whole after physical catastrophes. Homer survives through the show's general indifference to consequence. Burns survives through infrastructure, through money. Through the machine he has spent a century building that has as one of its central design goals the continuation of Charles Montgomery Burns. Every dollar he has spent, every politician he has purchased, every regulatory body he has compromised, every doctor he has retained on permanent private contract, all of it serves this end. Burns does not stay alive because the show needs him to. Burns stays alive because he has engineered systems specifically designed to ensure his survival regardless of what happens to his physical form. Homer's survival is passive. Burns's survival is a project. It is the oldest ongoing project in Springfield. It predates the power plant, predates Springfield as most of its residents know it, predates almost everything except the dynasty that produced Burns and that Burns has been maintaining ever since. There is something in this that connects back to the broader story of Springfield, to the relationship between Burns and everyone around him. Springfield cannot kill Burns. The show has demonstrated this repeatedly, but it cannot kill Burns for a reason that goes beyond his medical maintenance protocols. It cannot kill Burns because Springfield cannot survive without him. The town's economy depends on the plant. The plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on his treatments. And the treatments depend on the wealth generated by the plant. It is a system that feeds on itself, that has been feeding on itself for as long as Burns has owned the facility, and that has become so deeply embedded in Springfield's structure that removing it would not just hurt the town, it would probably end it. Springfield keeps Burns alive because Springfield has made itself unable to exist without him. That is not an accident. That is the result of a century of deliberate construction by a man who understood, very early in his long life, that the best way to make yourself indispensable is to make everything around you dependent on your continued presence. Burns did not just build a power plant. He built a dependency. He built a relationship between himself and the community that made his interests and the community's interests look identical, even as they diverged in every meaningful way. The town lights its homes with Burns's electricity. The town employs its workers in Burns's plant. The town's tax base, its economic foundation, its basic infrastructure, all of it is tied, in some way, to the continued operation of a facility owned by a man who uses radioactive material as a personal supplement, and so nobody can touch him. Nobody can challenge him. Nobody can make the connection between the cracked cooling towers and the yellow skin and the three-eyed fish and the people who stopped aging, because making that connection would mean confronting the thing that powers their homes and employs their neighbors and signs their paychecks. Burns is not immortal. He is something more durable than immortal. He is too expensive to remove. And Springfield will keep paying the bill, because the alternative, the town without the plant, without Burns, without the arrangement that has defined its existence for as long as anyone can remember, is something that nobody in Springfield is equipped to imagine. The radiation made sure of that. Let the thought of Burns rest in your mind for a moment. The frail, ancient, terrifying constancy of him. The way he has been there, always been there, in the corner office on the edge of the skyline, while the world changed around him, and the town adapted, and the decades turned and he did not. He is the still point at the center of Springfield spinning. Everything orbits him. Everything has always orbited him. And he will be there, presumably, long after the people theorizing about him have moved on to other things. That is the nature of very old money. It outlasts the curiosity of the people who study it. Section 6. Maggie's Secret. The silence and what it contains. Maggie Simpson does not speak. This is not a developmental delay. The show has established, across 36 years of careful accumulation, that Maggie is capable of speech. She said her first word once. A single episode where the moment was treated as a cameo appearance, the word was Daddy, voiced by Elizabeth Taylor, which is the kind of casting decision that reflects just how significant the moment was intended to feel. It was not a throwaway gag, it was a moment. And then it passed, and Maggie went back to silence, and has remained there ever since. There are a lot of babies on television who do not speak. This is not unusual. Babies in cartoons and sitcoms tend to communicate through nonverbal means, through gesture and expression, and the kind of enormous emotive eyes that animation does better than live action. The silence of cartoon babies is a convention, a tool, a way of keeping a character present, without requiring writers to solve the complex problem of giving them intelligible dialogue. But Maggie's silence is different from that. And the show has been insisting on that difference, quietly, persistently, for 3.5 decades, in the details it provides about what Maggie does when no one is watching. Let us begin with the most discussed moment, the end of Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 2, which we have already spent some time with, but which deserves another look now that we are thinking specifically about Maggie and what she knows. Everyone has left the room. The case has been closed. Burns has made his identification. The police have wrapped up. The family has dispersed. Maggie is alone. She looks around the room, carefully, deliberately. She turns her head slowly, checking each direction, confirming that she has privacy. And then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mimics the pulling of a trigger. Set aside, for the moment, the question of whether Maggie actually shot Burns. What that sequence of actions tells you is this: Maggie is aware of what happened. She is aware that it was significant. She is aware that performing this gesture in front of others would have consequences. She waited until she was certain she was unobserved to reenact it. That is not infant behavior. Infants do not wait for privacy. Infants do not check their surroundings before doing something. Infants have not yet developed the theory of mind necessary to understand that their actions look different to others than they do to themselves, or to recognize that some actions carry social consequences that should be avoided. The behavior Maggie demonstrates in that moment is the behavior of someone with a sophisticated understanding of social observation, cause and effect, and strategic information management. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. In 2012, the show produced a theatrical short film called The Longest Daycare. It was screened in cinemas before a major release. It was nominated for an Academy Award. It runs for 7 minutes, and in those 7 minutes, Maggie Simpson does things that should be impossible for a baby. The premise is simple. Maggie is dropped off at a daycare center run with the kind of authoritarian efficiency that the show saves for its most effective satire. She encounters a caterpillar in the process of forming a chrysalis, preparing, in the slow, patient way of caterpillars, to become a butterfly. Another child at the daycare wants to destroy it. Maggie wants to protect it. What follows is not a cute baby in peril story. It is a competency demonstration. Maggie reads the environment. She identifies the threat and the structural constraints of the daycare facility. She develops a plan. She executes the plan through a series of improvised adjustments when the initial approach fails. She navigates physical obstacles, security systems, and human behavioral patterns. She outmaneuvers both the child who wants to destroy the butterfly and the adults who are theoretically responsible for supervising everyone in the room. She does all of this in silence, using body language and environmental awareness, and the kind of spatial reasoning that developmental psychologists do not expect to see in children until they are several years older than Maggie is depicted as being. And she succeeds. Every decision she makes is correct. Every plan she executes works, at the point where it matters. Her physical limitations, she falls, she stumbles. She is constrained by the motor control of a 1-year-old, do not slow her down, because her problem solving is fast enough and adaptive enough to compensate for everything her body cannot do. Her mind is operating at a level that her body cannot support. The part anyway, the show has also tested Maggie directly in various episodes that touch on her intelligence and then move on before fully exploring what the results suggest. The tests vary, the scores vary, but the pattern is consistent. Whatever is happening in Maggie's head is not what is happening in the heads of other children her age. Some episodes indicate that her intelligence cannot be accurately measured by available instruments. Some suggest results so far outside the normal range that the characters administering the tests are not sure what to do with the information. And then the scene ends, and Maggie goes back to her high chair, and the show moves on. Because the show always moves on. That is Springfield's defense mechanism against self-knowledge. Encounter something you cannot explain, cannot comfortably integrate into the established narrative, cannot process without changing what you believe about everything else, and move on. Keep moving. Do not give it time to settle into implication. But if you do not move on, if you stay with Maggie for a moment, in the quiet that she herself inhabits so comfortably, you start to see the shape of a strategy. Look at what happens to the intelligent people in the Simpson family. Lisa is the most obvious example. Lisa Simpson is brilliant. The show has established this in ways that go well beyond the self-report of a character who might simply be a precocious child with an inflated sense of her own abilities. Lisa's intelligence is demonstrated, consistently, through what she can actually do, her music, her academic performance, her capacity for analysis and synthesis and creative problem-solving in situations that challenge adults around her. She is, by any reasonable standard, one of the most cognitively gifted children in Springfield. And her life is defined, in large measure, by the consequences of being that gifted in a place that cannot accommodate her. Lisa speaks up and gets dismissed. Lisa challenges authority and faces punishment. Lisa tries to improve things around her and encounters resistance so consistent and so thorough that it begins to look like a structural response rather than a series of individual failures. Springfield does not know what to do with Lisa. It never has. The show's most recurring emotional note involving her character is the loneliness of a brilliant person in an environment that has decided, collectively, that brilliance is not a value worth cultivating. Maggie has watched this. She has been watching it since the day she was born. She was placed in the same household as her sister, and she has had a front-row position for every moment in which Lisa's intelligence brought her into conflict with the world around her and lost. She has watched the smartest person in the family consistently fail to get what she wants because the way she pursues it visibly, loudly, in full public expression of everything she knows and feels makes her a target. The lesson Maggie appears to have drawn from this is not the lesson Lisa draws from it, which is that you should keep fighting regardless of the cost. Maggie's lesson is different. Silence is armor. Invisibility is a strategic position. The less you announce yourself, the more freedom you have to operate. Consider what Maggie has been able to accomplish precisely because no one takes her seriously. She shot a man regardless of what you believe about who actually pulled that trigger and was not charged because no jury would convict a baby. She organized a daycare rebellion against an authoritarian facility and succeeded because no one monitors infants closely enough to see them organizing. She has saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations across the show's run, in moments that are treated as cute and then forgotten, because the family does not maintain a running account of how many times Maggie has been the one who actually handled things. Every heroic act Maggie performs, she performs below the radar, in the margins, in the spaces where no one is paying enough attention to notice. She has ensured that no one pays attention by maintaining the most effective disguise available to her. Being exactly what everyone expects a baby to be. Passive, dependent, pre-verbal. Not particularly interesting. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. And she has spent 36 years making sure that the people around her, her family, her town, the audience never quite remember that. Now connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contaminated environment is producing mutations in its residents, and if those mutations affect different individuals differently based on their biology, their exposure level, their specific genetic response to the contamination, then what Maggie represents is something specific and significant. She represents the extreme positive end of what radiation can do to a brain, in the same way that Homer represents the extreme negative end. Homer's cognitive function has been reduced by some combination of radiation exposure, the physical crayon, and the accumulated damage of decades of living in Springfield. Maggie's cognitive function appears to have been amplified supercharged in the direction opposite from Homer's degradation, producing not a simplified brain but a hyper-capable one. Same family, same house, same water and air and environmental exposure, different genetic response to the same stimulus. Homer and Maggie are the two poles of Springfield's radiation story. What the contamination takes from one of them, it apparently gave to the other. And neither of them, for different reasons, can fully articulate what has happened to them. Homer because he cannot, the damage has robbed him of the capacity for that kind of self-examination. Maggie because she will not. Because she has calculated, correctly, that announcing what she knows would change her situation in ways she does not want it changed. If the coma theory is true, Maggie's intelligence has a different and more emotionally weighted explanation. Homer cannot watch his youngest child grow up. He cannot be there for the things she learns, the person she becomes, the choices she makes as she develops from the infant he last saw into whoever she would be by now. His dreaming mind, receiving no information about what Maggie is actually like as she grows, fills the gap with what a father would hope for his child. He makes her capable. He makes her extraordinary. He makes her the kind of person who will be okay without him there to protect her, because in the dream, he cannot be there to protect her, and a father who loves his child the way Homer loves Maggie cannot rest in that uncertainty. Her genius, in this reading, is not a mutation, it is a prayer. It is a father's deepest hope for his youngest child, expressed in the only language available to an unconscious mind, which is the language of desire translated into dream. That interpretation does not require you to accept the coma theory as fact. It just requires you to sit with the emotional truth of it for a moment. A man who fell asleep when his youngest child was roughly 1 year old, dreaming her as someone who will be fine. Someone who is, in fact, more fine than anyone around her. Someone who has the situation well in hand, even when no one realizes it. That is a profoundly gentle idea dressed up as a mystery. But there is also a darker reading, and it lives in the same evidence. Maggie does not speak because she has learned that speaking gets you nothing in Springfield. She does not reveal her intelligence because intelligence is punished here. She is watching everything and remembering everything and understanding everything, and she is waiting. For what? The show has never told us. Maggie's endgame is the last truly unsolved mystery in the Simpson family. Every other major character arc has been, if not resolved, at least explored to the point where you have a sense of where it leads. Homer's story is a tragedy of potential unrealized. Lisa's story is an ongoing battle between who she is and what Springfield can accommodate. Bart's story is a slow accumulation of consequences that he has never quite been required to fully face. Maggie's story is a preparation. It has always felt like a preparation. Like someone who is gathering information, developing capacity, waiting for the moment when action will be both possible and necessary. We have seen glimpses of what she can do when she decides to act. We have seen her move with precision and intelligence in situations where the people around her are flailing. We have seen her confirm or deny things with a nod or a look in ways that the family trusts implicitly, even if they cannot explain why. She is 1 year old, and she cannot walk reliably, and she has not formed a second sentence in 36 years, and she is the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace. She just has not decided what to do about it yet. Maybe that is the most Springfield thing about Maggie. She has all the tools to change her situation. She has all the intelligence and the will and the strategic capacity to do something about the place she lives in and the things she knows about it. And she sits in her high chair, watching, waiting, her enormous eyes taking in everything, saying nothing. Just like Springfield itself, which has always had everything it needed to confront the truth about what is happening to it, and has always chosen, in the end, to watch quietly instead. Section 7. The Mother Who Vanished. Mona, Burns, and 3 generations of damage. For 6 seasons, Homer Simpson believed his mother was dead. This is the kind of detail that the show establishes early and then does not return to for a long time, Because on the surface, it reads as simple backstory, a sad explanation for why Homer grew up the way he did, without a maternal figure, raised by a father who was emotionally remote in ways the show explores, with both comedy and unexpected tenderness. Abe Simpson is not a villain. He is a man who lost his wife when his son was very young, and who coped with that loss by not talking about it, which is a very human response and a very inadequate one, and which left Homer to construct a version of childhood around an absence that nobody ever fully explained. For 6 seasons, that absence was grief. Homer's mother was dead, the show implied, and Homer had processed that grief in the way that Homer processes most things imperfectly, incompletely, with a lot of denial and a tendency to redirect the emotion into something else, usually food or alcohol, or the particular kind of physical comedy that comes from a man who has learned to turn his pain into something people can laugh at. And then season 7 arrived, and everything changed. The episode is called Mother Simpson. It aired on the 19th of November, 1995. It is, by wide consensus among the show's long-term viewers, one of the greatest episodes in the history of the series, not because it is the funniest, though it has its moments, but because it takes the emotional foundation of Homer's character and reveals that this foundation was built on a lie. Homer's mother is not dead. She was never dead. She has been alive for Homer's entire life, and she has been a fugitive for most of it, and the reason she left when Homer was a child is the reason that, 30 years later, feels less like a personal tragedy and more like a conspiracy. Let us go back to 1969. Mona Simpson, Homer's mother, Abe's wife, was, by all appearances, an ordinary housewife in Springfield, young, married, with a small son named Homer. The world outside was in upheaval. The civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, the counterculture, the sense that the institutions American society was built on were either changing or being forced to change. Mona watched all of it from inside a conventional domestic life and felt, at some point, that watching was not enough. She was radicalized. The show depicts this with its characteristic combination of affection and comedy, but it is careful to make clear that Mona's cause was legitimate. She joined a group of activists. They had a target. The target was a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Hold that for a moment. Mr. Burns did not just own a nuclear power plant with 342 safety violations. He owned a germ warfare facility. He was manufacturing biological weapons, weaponized pathogens, agents designed to cause mass illness in Springfield, the same town where the plant was already contaminating the water supply, the same town where children played and families lived, and nobody had any idea what was happening in the buildings owned by the richest man in town. Mona and her group broke into the laboratory. They deployed what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb, a device designed to destroy the biological agents stored in the facility. The raid worked. The germs were destroyed. The lab's dangerous contents were neutralized. In the chaos, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, who turned out to be a young Clancy Wiggum, the same man who would later become Springfield's spectacularly ineffective chief of police. But Mona made one mistake. As the group was fleeing, someone fell in the chaos. She stopped to help. She stopped to help the person who had fallen, because that is who Mona Simpson was, a woman who, even in the middle of an escape from a facility she had just bombed, could not walk past someone who needed assistance. The person she stopped to help was Mr. Burns. Burns saw her face. He looked at the woman who had just destroyed his biological weapons laboratory and memorized her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment forward, Mona Simpson was a federal fugitive, unable to go home, unable to contact her family, unable to hold her son or explain to him what had happened or why she had to disappear. She kissed Homer while he was sleeping. She walked out into the night. And for the next 27 years, Homer grew up believing his mother had died. The emotional damage of this belief is not something the show presents as subtle. Homer's personality, his desperate need for approval, his fear of abandonment, his willingness to accept treatment from his employer that would cause most self-respecting people to leave, his clinging love for Marge that occasionally veers into the anxious rather than the secure, all of it becomes readable as the personality of a man who learned, at the most formative age possible, that the people who are supposed to stay do not always stay. That love is not a guarantee of presence. That the warmth you are holding onto can simply be gone one morning, without warning, with no explanation that makes it hurt any less. Homer spent 30 years believing he was the kind of son whose mother would rather be dead than stay with. That is the version of himself that Abe's lie permitted Homer to construct. And it went unexamined, unchallenged, embedded in his foundational understanding of who he was for the entirety of his childhood and adolescence and early adulthood. The reunion in Mother Simpson is one of the most carefully handled emotional sequences the show has produced. It takes its time with the awkwardness of it. Two people who should know each other meeting as strangers, trying to rebuild from nothing the relationship that should have had 27 years of history. Marge handles it with characteristic grace. Homer handles it with characteristic emotional chaos. But Mona tells Homer the truth. She tells him what happened. She tells him about the laboratory and the raid and Burns and the FBI and the years of being a fugitive, moving from place to place, maintaining her anonymity, staying alive, staying away from the family she had been forced to leave. And then Burns finds out she is back in Springfield, and the FBI shows up at the Simpson house, and Mona has to flee again. Homer has to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. This is the moment where the personal tragedy intersects with something larger, because Homer knows, at this point, who the man is who has done this to his family. He knows that the billionaire who hunted his mother, who forced her out of her life, who has been actively pursuing her for 30 years with the resources that only a man of his wealth can deploy, is the same man who signs Homer's paychecks. Homer works for Burns, has worked for Burns his entire adult life, earns the money that puts food on his family's table from the man who stole his mother, and then watched Homer grow up without her. And Homer does not connect the dots. Not fully. Not in the way that would lead to action. He does not confront Burns. He does not quit. He does not seem to fully process, in the way that a person with an undamaged brain would process it, the relationship between the man who signs his checks and the man who destroyed his family. The show does not play this as a joke. It plays it as tragedy, because Homer's inability to make this connection is not a character flaw in the ordinary sense. It is a symptom. It is what happens to a man whose cognitive capacity has been reduced by radiation and by a childhood without the maternal presence that would have helped him develop the ability to make exactly this kind of large, structural connection. Homer cannot see the architecture of his own suffering because the damage has robbed him of the kind of thinking that architecture requires. Burns, in this reading, did not just take Homer's mother. He took Homer's capacity to understand what he had lost. And then the show goes further. In a later episode, it is revealed that Burns and Abe Simpson, Homer's father, had a secret arrangement. Burns had committed a crime that Abe had discovered. In exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer a permanent position at the plant. The deal was that Homer would always have a job at the nuclear facility, regardless of his performance, regardless of the mistakes he made, regardless of how many times he should have been removed. 742 documented errors. That is the number the show provides, at one point, for the count of Homer's documented workplace failures. 742 instances in which Homer's performance at the nuclear safety job fell below any reasonable professional standard. And after all of them, Burns kept him on. The deal held. Burns did not keep Homer employed out of fondness or carelessness or the absent-minded forgiveness of an employer who does not pay close enough attention to his workforce. Burns kept Homer employed because a competent safety inspector would have shut the plant down. A safety inspector with a functioning brain and a genuine commitment to public welfare would have looked at those 342 violations and refused to look away. A competent person in Homer's position would have been, for Burns, an existential threat. Homer is a brilliant choice for the role he occupies. From Burns's perspective, he is damaged enough to be ineffective. He is desperate enough to be grateful. He is frightened enough of abandonment to stay regardless of the conditions. He is cognitively impaired enough to never quite see the whole picture of what his employment is costing him and the people around him. The broken man in Sector 7G is exactly the worker Burns needed. And Burns made sure before Homer was old enough to choose his own path that the broken man was who Homer would be. 3 generations. That is what the Mona Simpson storyline reveals when you follow it all the way down. Burns destroyed Mona's freedom because she destroyed his weapons. Mona's disappearance broke Homer in ways that defined his entire adult life, including and especially his willingness to work for the man responsible. Homer's compromised state in Sector 7G has kept the plant running in a way that allows the contamination to continue, which affects his children, who grew up drinking the same poisoned water and breathing the same radioactive air. 3 generations of Simpsons damaged by the same man's grudge, each damage creating the conditions for the next. A cascade of consequences that runs forward through time like a slow, quiet flood. And Burns won. He keeps winning. He won when Mona fled. He won when Abe made the deal. He won when Homer took the job. He is winning now, in the sense that the plant is still running, and the water is still contaminated, and the cooling towers are still cracked, and the safety inspector is still Homer Simpson, which means nothing fundamental has changed, and nothing fundamental is likely to. Mona Simpson eventually died. The show depicts her death with the kind of restraint that the show rarely uses for anything. No punchline, no cutaway, no reset button. Just a man sitting beside his mother as she slips away, holding her hand, watching the light go. The weight of 27 stolen years pressing down on both of them simultaneously, equally, in the way that grief has of arriving in full, regardless of how long you have known it was coming. She died, and Burns was still there, still in his corner office on the edge of the skyline, still humming. That is the horror underneath the family comedy. Not jump scares, not dramatic reveals, just the quiet, patient, decades-long horror of a system that grinds people into its required shape and then resumes operation as though the grinding were simply background noise. Mona fought the system and lost everything. Abe made peace with it and lost himself. Homer inherited the consequences and never understood why his life felt the way it did, heavy and slightly off, like a house built on ground that was never quite stable. And Burns remained. Let that settle around you like the quiet of a late night. Let it be something you can hold without it consuming you. These are old wounds, old losses, the kind that Springfield has had decades to absorb into the background of its normal operation, the way you absorb a chronic pain until it becomes simply the texture of being in a body. The night is quiet. The plant still hums. Mona is gone, and the deals are still in place, and Homer is still in Sector 7G. And somewhere in the town, in a house on Evergreen Terrace, a family sleeps through all of it. Section 8, the town that voted for the lie, Springfield's collective denial. On the 28th of September 1997, the second episode of the 9th season of The Simpsons aired, and a significant portion of the show's fan base decided that this was the moment everything went wrong. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper. Its reputation has calcified, over the decades since it aired, into something nearly universal among long-term viewers of the show. It is cited as the point at which The Simpsons stopped respecting its own continuity, the betrayal of a character the audience had invested in, the beginning of the end of the show's relationship with the kind of internal consistency that fans depend on to feel that the world of the show is real. The criticism is understandable. What the episode does to Seymour Skinner, the character who has been Springfield Elementary's principal since the show's beginning, the man whose fraught relationship with authority, with his mother, with Bart Simpson, and with his own sense of identity had been carefully developed across 8 seasons is, on the surface, a destruction. It reveals that everything we knew about him was built on a fiction, that his name is not his name, his past is not his past, his mother is not his mother, and the person standing in front of you when you look at Principal Skinner is not, in any meaningful sense, who he says he is. But here is the thing that the criticism almost universally misses. The episode is completely honest. It is the most honest thing Springfield has ever done about itself. Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. In the middle of this celebration, a stranger enters. A man no one recognizes. He identifies himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real one, a decorated Vietnam War veteran who was believed killed in action after being captured as a prisoner of war. He survived. He escaped. He spent years getting back to America, and when he finally got back, he found that someone else had been living his life. The man Springfield has known as Seymour Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a street kid, petty criminal, no future, no particular prospects. He was drafted. He served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed dead, Tamzarian felt the particular guilt of a survivor who had not been taken, who had made it through something his comrade had not. He traveled to Springfield to tell Skinner's mother what had happened. But when he arrived, Agnes Skinner assumed, in her grief, that he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a home or a family or an identity worth caring about, made the decision that would define the rest of his life. He went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, took the history, took the role of son to a woman who needed a son, and the role of principal to a school that needed a principal, and he lived inside that stolen identity for 20 years. He built a life there. It was a life that did not technically belong to him, but it was a life which is more than he had before. And then the real Skinner walked through the door, and the life came apart at the seams. Now, what Springfield does next is extraordinary. The town holds a meeting. Both men are present. The truth is fully, publicly, undeniably established. Everyone in Springfield knows who Tamzarian actually is and what he has done. The real Skinner is standing right there, the actual war hero, the actual person whose life was borrowed without permission for 2 decades. And Springfield takes a vote, not whether to prosecute Tamzarian, not whether to restore Skinner's name and identity and acknowledge what happened to him. The town votes on a more fundamental question, whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They choose the lie. They choose to keep Tamzarian as their Skinner, to maintain the fiction, to let the comfortable version of events persist at the expense of the true version. Judge Snyder, a judge, an officer of the legal system, a person whose professional purpose is the adjudication of truth, issues a legal decree. Armin Tamzarian is henceforth to be considered the true and legal Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the real one, the war veteran whose life was appropriated, is bound to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. And the judge adds one more provision. It is now explicitly, legally prohibited to ever mention this matter again, under penalty of torture. Let that sit for a moment. A functioning legal body and a functioning civic community just decreed that the truth about a public figure's identity is illegal to discuss. They expelled the man who represented the truth from the community. They gave legal protection to the false version of events and made it a criminal act to contradict that version. Fans hated this episode. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner, publicly objected to the storyline. Critics argued that it made everything about the character meaningless. The episode ranks near the bottom of nearly every fan ranking of the series, but all of that anger was pointed in the wrong direction. Because the episode is not making a statement about Skinner, it is making a statement about Springfield. And the statement is not a new one. It is the same statement the show has been making since the beginning, about what kind of place this is and how it works and why nothing ever changes. The episode just made the statement explicitly, in a way that could not be misread as background detail or comic exaggeration. Springfield does not forget things because its residents are stupid. Springfield forgets things because forgetting is safer than remembering. It does not sweep inconvenient truths under the rug out of laziness or inattention. It sweeps them deliberately, with full awareness of what it is doing, as a collective act of self-preservation. Every other time Springfield has done this, every other time the town has absorbed a catastrophe and returned to normal, as though nothing happened. Every other time a revelation has been made and then quietly set aside. Every other time the reset button has been pressed, and the community has reconvened in its established configuration as though the previous episode never occurred. It has happened off-screen. We see the disaster. We see the return to normal. We do not see the mechanism in between. The Principal and the Pauper is the one time the show let you watch the mechanism in real time. You see the vote. You see the decree. You see the expulsion. You see the legal protection of the lie. You see Springfield choosing to be what it is, actively, consciously, with everyone in the room aware of what they are doing and doing it anyway. And the question this raises about everything else in Springfield's history, about the contaminated water and the three-eyed fish and the billionaire who glows and the people who have not aged in 36 years, is not whether the town has been in denial about these things. Of course it has. The question is whether that denial is passive or active. The Principal and the Pauper says it is active. Springfield does not fail to notice the impossible things around it because the impossible things are too subtle or too gradual to be noticed. Springfield notices them, and then Springfield, collectively, through some process that the town has apparently performed so many times that it has become second nature, decides not to pursue the question, decides to close the file, decides to look at the three-eyed fish and say, well, that is just how things are around here, and move on. Because the alternative is a chain of consequences that none of them can afford. If they acknowledge the contamination, they would have to confront the power plant. If they confronted the power plant, they would have to challenge Burns. If they challenged Burns, the economy would collapse. If the economy collapsed, the town would die. So they do not acknowledge the contamination. They maintain, instead, the agreed-upon version of Springfield, the one where the water is fine, and the plant is a normal facility, and the yellow skin is just how people look, and nobody really needs to ask any further questions. The real Seymour Skinner was not expelled from Springfield because he was annoying or dangerous. He was expelled because he was the truth, and in Springfield, the truth is what gets expelled. He was tied to a train and sent out of town because he showed up with proof that the official narrative was false, and the town's response to proof was not to investigate or correct or thank him for the information. It was to criminalize the information and remove the person carrying it. That is not a cartoon trope. That is a description of how real communities maintain comfortable fictions. Small towns in particular, and Springfield is, in its essential character, a small town, regardless of how large it appears in various episodes, have a documented capacity for collective denial that is equal parts human and frightening. Scandals get buried. Crimes get explained away. Uncomfortable histories get edited into versions that are more useful to the present arrangement of power. The Principal and the Pauper is Springfield doing this in real time, with the cameras rolling in a way that makes the mechanism visible to anyone paying attention. The connection to the coma theory is one that the show itself does not draw, but that becomes difficult to ignore once you have both frameworks in mind. If Homer is dreaming, if every episode since April 1993 is a product of an unconscious mind generating a story about itself, then this episode is Homer's dreaming mind, creating a scenario in which an entire town votes to maintain a comfortable fiction rather than face a difficult truth. Why would Homer's dreaming mind invent this scenario? Because Homer needs to believe it is possible. He needs to believe that a false life can become a real one through collective agreement, that the thing you are pretending to be can become what you actually are, if enough people decide to go along with it. Because Homer's coma is itself a false life, a simulation masquerading as reality, and for the simulation to continue, for the dream to keep running, Homer needs the theoretical infrastructure of a world in which false things are permitted to be true as long as everyone agrees to treat them that way. Tamzarian is still living as Skinner. Springfield is still maintaining the fiction. And the real Skinner is out there somewhere, on the other end of wherever that train was going, carrying the truth that nobody wanted. Springfield punishes truth-tellers. It always has. It always will. Not because it is malicious, exactly, but because the truth in Springfield costs too much, and so the comfortable lie persists, the same way it has always persisted. The same way it will keep persisting, probably, for as long as the plant keeps running and the water keeps flowing and the residents keep going home at the end of each episode to the same houses on the same streets under the same slightly wrong-colored sky. Nothing changes in Springfield. That is the point. That has always been the point. And The Principal and the Pauper is the episode where the show told you, directly and without ambiguity, that nothing changing is not an accident. It is a vote. It is renewed continuously by a population that has decided, in full knowledge of the alternative, that this is what they want. Breathe. The lie is comfortable. In its own way, in the specific way that things we choose not to examine can be restful, there is something almost peaceful about Springfield's collective decision to let the official version stand. You do not have to live in that decision. You can just observe it, from the outside, from the safe distance of a late night that is slowly becoming morning. The next part of our journey takes us somewhere we cannot precisely locate on any map, because Springfield, whatever else it is not findable in the way that real places are findable. And the reasons for that are more interesting than you might expect. Section 9. Springfield has no address the geography of impossibility. You cannot find Springfield on a map. This is not because the show's creators have been careless about geography, or because they made a choice early in the series and then forgot what that choice was. The show's writers know exactly what they are doing with Springfield's location. They have always known. And what they have been doing, consistently, across 36 seasons and hundreds of episodes, is something considerably more deliberate than simple geographic vagueness. They have been making Springfield unfindable on purpose. Let us establish what we actually know about Springfield's location, based on the evidence the show has provided. This will take a moment, because the evidence is extensive and consistently contradictory in ways that go well beyond normal errors of continuity. Springfield has an oceanfront. In multiple episodes, characters go to the beach within what appears to be short driving distance of the town. Springfield also has mountains, actual mountains, visible in the background of certain establishing shots, close enough to matter to the geography. Springfield has a desert nearby. It has farmland. It has forests that appear to be Pacific Northwest in character, and forests that appear to be deciduous eastern woodland. It has a harbor. It has a gorge. It has what appears in some episodes to be a significant river system. No single location in the continental United States has all of these geographic features within driving distance of a single point. Mountains and ocean together require a coastal western state. Desert requires the Southwest. The combination of farmland and the kind of small-town Midwestern insularity the show captures so precisely suggests somewhere in the center. The Northeast comes through in certain architectural details and civic attitudes. Springfield is everywhere in America. It is genuinely, physically present in every region simultaneously, which is geographically impossible and which the show has maintained as a consistent impossibility for its entire run. The show's own creator addressed this once. Matt Groening admitted in a 2012 Smithsonian Magazine interview that he named Springfield after the town in Oregon near which he grew up. This was not a new confession. He had hinted at it before, but it was the most explicit and widely reported statement of it. For approximately 48 hours, fans believed the mystery had been solved. Springfield was in Oregon. And then the show continued, in subsequent episodes, to place Springfield in geographic contexts that were obviously incompatible with Oregon. The writers did not honor the confession. They kept contradicting it, deliberately, as if to say, yes, we know where the name came from. That is not the point. The location is not to be located. Springfield's area code has been identified as beginning with 636, which is a Missouri prefix. One episode establishes that the state abbreviation is NT, which is not a real state abbreviation. When Homer calls his state capital, the person who answers says the state begins with a vowel, which narrows the field significantly without closing it. The show, when pressed for clues, provides clues that narrow and then expand in equal measure, like a maze that redirects rather than resolves. Why? The official answer, the one the creators have given, the one that is accurate as far as it goes, is that Springfield is designed to be universal. Every American viewer is supposed to feel that Springfield could be their town, could be down the road from where they grew up, could be the American community they carry around in their imagination regardless of where they actually live. A fixed location would undermine this. A Springfield in Oregon is a Springfield that does not fully belong to the viewers in Alabama or Maine or Montana. A Springfield that could be anywhere is a Springfield that belongs to everyone. This is true. It is the deliberate design philosophy. It has been confirmed by enough people associated with the show that doubting it would be contrarianism rather than analysis. But there is another layer, and it sits underneath the universal appeal explanation, the way all of Springfield's deeper truths sit underneath their surface explanations. Present, quiet, waiting for someone to look directly at it. A town with no fixed location cannot be regulated by any particular state. This matters more than it might seem. Environmental regulation in the United States is partly federal and partly state level. The EPA operates nationally, but enforcement and monitoring depend heavily on state environmental agencies, state attorneys general, local regulatory bodies. A nuclear facility is subject to oversight from the state in which it operates. If the state changes, if Springfield drifts between states, depending on which episode you are watching, then the regulatory framework around it drifts as well. Nobody has persistent jurisdiction over a town with no persistent location. Burns's facility, which has 342 safety violations, which has been dumping radioactive waste into waterways for decades, which has human skeletons in its basement and luminous rats in its walls, that facility is operating in a regulatory no man's land. Any enforcement action would require establishing which state's law applies, which state's environmental standards govern, which state's attorney general has standing to bring charges. Springfield's geographic instability makes that determination permanently, structurally impossible. Springfield floats between jurisdictions because floating between jurisdictions keeps it from landing in one, and landing in one would mean someone with authority could show up with a map and a badge and start asking questions about what the plant has been doing to the community around it. The geography is a legal shield. It has always been a legal shield. Whether it was designed as one, whether this was a conscious decision by Burns or by the town or by some combination of both, operating through the mechanism of collective denial that the principal and the pauper made explicit, is less important than the fact that it functions as one. Whatever the intent, the result is the same. Springfield cannot be found, and therefore Springfield cannot be held to account. The coma theory offers a different and more emotionally immediate explanation for the geographic impossibility. Homer's brain in this reading does not have a precise and accurate map of America in its long-term memory. It has impressions. It has feelings associated with places. It has fragments, memories of particular views, particular air quality, particular kinds of light falling through particular kinds of trees that it has accumulated over the 40-odd years of conscious life before the vending machine fell. When his dreaming mind assembled Springfield, it did not consult an atlas. It assembled the town from every place that had ever felt like home, or like the idea of home, or like the America he knew. Mountains from a camping trip, ocean from a vacation, desert from something he saw driving through or on television, farmland from the kind of America that lives in the imagination even for people who have never been to it, amber waves of grain, the open plains, the big sky. Homer's Springfield is made of memory fragments layered on top of each other, without regard for the geographic logic that memory fragments, in a waking brain, are organized to preserve. A dreaming brain has no obligation to make its geography consistent. It has only to make it feel right. And Springfield feels right. It feels like America. It feels like everywhere. It feels like the composite of every American place Homer ever carried with him, because that is precisely what it is. The emotional logic of the dream works where the physical logic fails. Springfield feels like home because it is made entirely of things that, in Homer's unconscious, are associated with home. That is why it is impossible to find on a map. You cannot find an emotion on a map. You cannot GPS a longing for the familiar. The mockumentary episode Behind the Laughter, aired in the 12th season, attempted something unusual for the show, a direct statement of Springfield's location. In the original broadcast, the Simpson family is identified as being from northern Kentucky. This was as close as the show had ever come to committing to an answer. And then, in syndication, the location was changed. Reruns of the same episode identified a different state. The canonical location of Springfield became dependent on which version of the episode you happened to see original broadcast or syndication, which platform you were watching on, which year the episode was aired. The show gave you the answer and then changed the answer. The truth of Springfield's location is variable depending on the circumstance of the viewing. It shifts. It mutates. It refuses to be pinned down in the same way that everything else about Springfield refuses to be pinned down the same way the cooling towers are always there, but never quite in the same place relative to the town, the same way the Simpson house has a different floor plan depending on the episode, the same way the town's population fluctuates between episodes, without anyone acknowledging that hundreds of people have appeared and disappeared. Springfield is not a place. Springfield is an idea of a place. And ideas do not have zip codes. Every state in the Union has been proposed, at some point, by some fan or theorist or casual observer as Springfield's home. Every theory has evidence supporting it. Every theory has evidence against it. The show has maintained this state of permanent geographic ambiguity, not because it forgot the answer, but because the ambiguity is the answer. A town that could be anywhere is a town that belongs to everyone. A town that belongs to everyone cannot be shut down by anyone. Springfield will never be located. The show decided this early and has maintained it with the same stubborn consistency with which it has maintained everything else about its impossible setting. The mystery of where Springfield is not a mystery with a solution waiting to be found. It is a mystery that is its own solution. The not knowing is the point. The nowhere is the home. And there is something gently comforting about that, if you let it settle. Something about a place that belongs to everyone equally, that cannot be claimed or owned or precisely located, that feels, at this particular hour of night, appropriate. You cannot find Springfield, but you have always known where it is. Section 10. The predictions: how a cartoon wrote the future. There is a particular kind of conversation that happens, reliably, every few months on the internet. Someone finds a clip or a screenshot or a still frame from an episode of The Simpsons. They post it alongside a news headline from the present day. The headline and the clip seem to describe the same thing, the same event, the same technology, the same political development, the same cultural moment, separated by a gap of 10, 15, 20, sometimes 30 years. And the caption, or the comment, or the follow-up post says some version of the same thing. The Simpsons predicted this. You have seen this. Everyone who has spent any time on the internet has seen it. It happens with such regularity that it has become its own genre of content, its own recognizable form, its own reliable source of a particular mixture of awe and mild unease. The show predicted Trump. The show predicted the smartwatch. The show predicted the pandemic. The show predicted the Disney acquisition of Fox. The show predicted things that had not happened yet, and when those things happened, the clip was ready, waiting, to be placed beside the news in that slightly eerie juxtaposition that feels like prophecy. Tonight we are going to look at the predictions carefully, the ones that are real, the ones that are more complicated than they appear, and the explanation for all of them that is more interesting than either the conspiracy version or the debunker's dismissal. Let us start with the ones that are genuinely striking, because dismissing them entirely would be as dishonest as treating them as supernatural. In the year 2000, the episode Bart to the Future depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson had become the first female president of the United States. In setting up the political context for this future, the episode identifies Lisa's predecessor in the Oval Office. His name is Donald Trump, and the episode treats his presidency as an established historical fact, something that happened, that Lisa is now dealing with the consequences of in her administration. The episode aired in March of 2000. Donald Trump had flirted publicly with the idea of running for president since the late 1980s, but had never done so, and there was no serious indication in 2000 that he would become the Republican nominee for anything, let alone president. 16 years later, he won the election. The specificity is what makes this prediction feel different from a lucky guess. It was not just celebrity might run for president as a general satirical premise. It was Trump, named in the Oval Office, 16 years before it happened. The show even depicted him descending an escalator in a visual that mirrors, almost exactly, the announcement he made in 2015 when he formally entered the race. The Tiger Attack. In 1993, an episode featured a parody of Siegfried and Roy, the Las Vegas performers famous for their show involving white tigers. In the episode, one of the performers is attacked by one of the white tigers during a show. In 2003, 10 years later, Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers during a performance. The specificity again, not just performers are sometimes in danger with wild animals, the specific act, the specific animal, the specific type of attack. A decade before it happened, the pandemic episode. In 1993, a flu originating in Asia spreads to Springfield. The townspeople panic. They engage in bulk buying. They search frantically for a cure. An experimental treatment is rushed to market. During the chaos of the outbreak, a swarm of insects is released, specifically bees, though the details vary slightly depending on which version of the episode you are watching, which felt uncomfortably specific when Asian giant hornets, labeled murder hornets by a media in search of an additional 2020 horror, appeared in the United States during the actual pandemic of that year. The Disney-Fox merger, a 1,998 episode, depicted Fox's parent company being acquired by a massive media conglomerate identified as a Disney-adjacent entity. In 2019, Disney purchased 21st Century Fox in a deal worth approximately $71 billion. The Simpsons, which airs on Fox, became technically owned by Disney, the company it had been satirizing for decades. The show that depicted the acquisition now operated under the umbrella of the entity it had depicted acquiring its parent company, the smartwatch. In 1995, Homer uses a device strapped to his wrist that performs functions resembling a modern smartwatch: communication, calendar management, the kinds of personal computing tasks that would not be available on consumer wristwear for another 2 decades. The Higgs boson equation. In a 1998 episode, Homer, briefly made intelligent by circumstances, writes an equation on a chalkboard. The equation, noticed and analyzed by a physicist decades later, appears to predict the mass of the Higgs boson particle. The Higgs boson was not experimentally confirmed to exist until 2012 at the Large Hadron Collider, the donut universe. Homer proposes in a 1999 episode that the universe is shaped like a donut, a toroidal structure, rather than a flat or spherical one. Years after the episode aired, cosmologists identified radiation patterns in the cosmic microwave background that some researchers interpreted as consistent with a toroidal universe shape. The Cypress Hill and London Symphony Orchestra collaboration. In a 1996 episode, the hip-hop group Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra. This was a joke about the absurdity of a specific mismatch of musical genres and institutional contexts. In 2024, 28 years after the episode aired, Cypress Hill actually performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall in London. These are real. These are documented. These are not misattributed or cherry-picked in the sense of fabricating clips that were never in the show. The predictions, or the things that look like predictions, exist. The question is what to make of them. The official position, from the people who make the show, is that the answer is essentially statistical. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer for much of the series run, has said it plainly. If you throw enough darts, some of them will hit the target. The show has produced nearly 800 episodes across 36 years. Each episode contains dozens of jokes, references, extrapolations, and satirical observations about American culture, technology, politics, and society. When you generate that volume of predictive content over that length of time, some of it is going to line up with future events through sheer probability. Producer Bill Oakley, who ran the show during some of its best-regarded seasons, put it this way: there are very few cases where the show predicted something. It is mainly coincidence, because the episodes are so old that history repeats itself. Fact-checking organizations have gone through the most viral prediction claims and found that the majority of them have ordinary, unsurprising explanations. The show made a joke about Trump becoming president because Trump had been publicly flirting with the idea since the late 1980s, and the joke about celebrity politics reaching its logical conclusion was available to anyone paying attention to the trajectory of American culture. The show made a joke about Disney acquiring Fox because media consolidation was an accelerating trend, and a joke about mega corporations consuming their competitors was available to anyone watching the entertainment industry in the late 1990s. The show predicted smartwatches because technology was demonstrably getting smaller and more personal, and extrapolating a wrist-mounted computer required no supernatural ability, only a clear eye for the direction things were moving. The writing staff of The Simpsons has historically been, by the standards of television comedy rooms, extraordinarily educated. Harvard degrees are common. Backgrounds in mathematics, computer science, hard sciences, political theory. These are not people guessing. They are intelligent observers of American culture who spend their professional lives studying trends and patterns and pushing those trends and patterns to their logical and often absurd extremes. They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present more carefully than most people do and then writing down what seems likely to come next. This explains most of the predictions. It does not explain all of them. The Tiger attack is specific in a way that trend reading cannot fully account for. The Higgs boson equation is specific in a way that requires either genuine mathematical knowledge or extraordinary coincidence. The Cypress Hill thing is so precise, so particular, so unlikely as a random conjunction of specific cultural entities that the dart-throwing model feels slightly strained when you apply it to that one. And this is where the meta-theory becomes interesting, the one that sits underneath both the conspiracy version and the debunker's dismissal. And that is more interesting than either. The Simpsons does not predict the future. The Simpsons shapes it. Not through magic, not through any form of prophetic awareness, through cultural influence, which is the most durable and most underestimated force in any society's development. The Simpsons is one of the most watched, most quoted, most referenced pieces of American media in the country's history. It has been running for longer than most of its audience has been alive. Its references have become part of the American lexicon. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand their own culture, their own politics, their own institutions. It is, in a genuine and measurable sense, part of the cognitive infrastructure of American public life. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president in 2000, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. It becomes something millions of people have seen, have quoted, have referenced at parties and in arguments, and in the casual way that culturally embedded material gets referenced. The idea of a Trump presidency, the specific version of it that the show depicted, with its specific visual and emotional register, becomes a reference point. Something that primes the cultural imagination. Something that, when the real thing begins to materialize 15 years later, is greeted not with pure shock but with a sense of recognition. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already did this. The show does not predict. It normalizes. It takes ideas that are already present in the culture, already latent in the trends and trajectories and power dynamics of American life, and it presents them as accomplished facts. It treats future events as things that have already happened. And when those events eventually do happen, the cultural response is not amazement at the prophecy, but déjà vu at the fulfilled expectation. Springfield does not reflect America. America has become Springfield, the nuclear power plant run by a corrupt billionaire who is accountable to no one. The incompetent government that cannot protect its citizens from the consequences of unchecked corporate power. The population that is too distracted by its own immediate concerns to notice how thoroughly it is being exploited. The endless cycle of catastrophe and reset. The collective amnesia that allows the same mistakes to recur with no one connecting them to previous iterations of the same mistake. These are not predictions. They are diagnoses. The Simpsons looked at America in 1989 and described what it saw through the generous distortion of satire with enough precision that the description remained accurate for the next 36 years because the conditions it was describing did not change. The show did not predict where America was going. The show identified where America already was. The joke has been on the same target since the beginning. There is also the confirmation bias engine. The internet is the most powerful instrument for the selective recall of information in human history. When a prediction comes true, when a Simpsons clip lines up with a headline in that particular eerie way, the clip is shared, discussed, archived, saved, cited. It becomes part of the show's mythology. It gets added to the list. When a prediction does not come true, when a Simpsons joke about jetpacks or moon colonies, or a specific political outcome that did not materialize, nobody makes a viral post about it. Nobody compiles the list of things the Simpsons got wrong. The failures disappear. The successes accumulate. The resulting highlight reel looks like prophecy because it is a highlight reel curated by a collective process that only records the hits. Produce 800 episodes. Make thousands of observations about American culture and the trajectory it is on. Filter those observations through the most powerful confirmation bias engine ever created, which is a global internet with no mechanism for tracking failures, only successes. The resulting archive looks like the work of oracles. It is the work of very smart, very attentive writers with access to exceptional research capacity and a long runway. And yet, even knowing how it works, even understanding the statistical basis for the coincidences and the cultural mechanisms that make the predictions seem more precise than they are, even armed with the complete and satisfying explanation for why this happens, even then, when you see the clip next to the headline, when the detail matches and the date gap is 30 years and the specificity is uncomfortable even then, for just a moment, you feel it. The show knew. It has always known. The feeling does not require an explanation that holds up under scrutiny. It requires only that you be human and alive in this particular historical moment, watching a cartoon that has been running since before you could form long-term memories, that has become so thoroughly embedded in your understanding of the world that when it says something, it feels like it was always going to be true. That feeling is the show's greatest trick. Greater than any of the specific predictions, greater than the Trump episode or the tiger attack or the pandemic flu. The show has been with you long enough that it feels prophetic. And that feeling, the feeling that it knew, that it always knew, is not paranoia. It is the natural result of spending a significant portion of your life inside a story that has been telling you things about the world. The show did not predict the future. It just stayed around long enough that you started to mistake its observations for prescience. That is, in its own way, remarkable, and a little unsettling, and worth sitting with, quietly, as the night continues to deepen around you. Section 11. The Ones We Forgot: Hans Moleman, Ned Flanders, and the Quiet Horrors. We have spent most of tonight in the company of the Simpsons family and the larger forces that surround them. The plant and its owner. The coma and its dream. The mystery of who pulled a trigger in a parking lot in 1995. The geographic impossibility of the town itself. But Springfield is not only the Simpsons family. It is full of people, full of lives running parallel to Homer's, full of stories that the show visits and revisits across its long run, full of characters whose repeated presence suggests that the show knows something about them that it has not quite found the right moment to say directly. Tonight, before we reach the end of our journey, we are going to spend some time with two of them. The first is a very small, very old, very frequently deceased man named Hans Moleman. If you have watched The Simpsons for any length of time, you know Hans Moleman. He appears in the background of Springfield scenes and sometimes in the foreground, and his primary function in the show's universe appears to be getting hurt. He is hit by cars. He is crushed by falling objects. He is buried alive. He is attacked by animals. He is struck by lightning. He is incinerated. He is run over. He is eaten. He falls into holes. He is launched into the air by various devices and lands in ways that should be fatal. He has been killed, by various estimates, dozens of times across the show's canonical run. Not in Halloween episodes, not in fantasy sequences or dream sequences or explicitly non-canonical segments. In regular episodes, in the main continuity of the show, Hans Moleman dies and then appears in the next episode as though the previous death had not occurred. This is, on its surface, a running gag. The little old man keeps dying and keeps coming back, and the show treats this as comedic background detail, the kind of joke that gets funnier through repetition until it achieves a kind of ambient presence in the show's world. A low-level absurdity that you stop noticing because it has become part of the fabric. But under any of the frameworks we have been working with tonight, Hans Moleman is deeply strange. If the radiation theory is correct, if Springfield's contaminated environment is producing biological mutations in its residents, mutations that affect different people in different ways, based on their individual biology and the specific character of their exposure, then Moleman is the extreme expression of one particular kind of mutation. A mutation that has not diminished him or amplified his cognition or altered his physical appearance in the ways that most Springfield residents have been altered. A mutation that has done something considerably more bizarre. It has made death temporary for him. Homer survives things that should kill him through a combination of cartoon physics and, in the radiation theory, a body that has been altered enough by long-term exposure to be dramatically more physically resilient than a normal human body. But Homer does not die. He endures damage and heals. Moleman actually dies. His body stops, and then, without explanation, without resurrection scene, without any acknowledgement by the show or its characters that anything remarkable has occurred, he is back, present in the next scene, ready to be killed again. Death in Springfield is supposed to be permanent. The show treats the deaths of significant characters as real and final. When Maude Flanders died, she stayed dead. When Sideshow Bob's various victims appeared to die, the show treated those deaths as serious plot points. Death in Springfield has weight. Except when it happens to Hans Moleman, at which point it has no weight at all. It is a revolving door. Under the radiation theory, this makes a terrible kind of sense. Moleman is the mutation nobody wanted. He has been altered at a cellular level in a way that prevents his body from maintaining death, from holding the state of not living in a stable configuration. His cells reconstitute. His biology reboots. He comes back. Not because he is heroic or special or divinely protected, but because the contamination has done something to his physiology that makes the final cessation of biological function temporarily rather than permanently impossible for him. That is not a superpower. That is a horror. To die repeatedly, to experience death as a recurring event rather than a singular one, to have the end of your existence be something that happens to you every few weeks and then reverses. The show plays this as comedy. But if you sit with the actual experience of it for a moment, it is the opposite of funny. It is the most trapped version of Springfield's general entrapment. Everyone in Springfield is stuck. Molman is stuck in a loop that includes death. He also made a statement about his age that the show has never revisited. In one episode, he identifies himself as being 31 years old. 31. Hans Moleman, who appears to be in his mid-80s at the youngest, who has the physical presentation of a man who has been old for a very long time, is 31 years old. If he is telling the truth, and there is no reason within the show to believe he is lying, no joke being set up that would require him to misstate his age, then something has aged him catastrophically and prematurely. Something took a man in the early years of his adulthood and advanced him decades beyond his biological calendar. Something that has also simultaneously made him nearly unkillable despite his apparently extreme physical fragility, rapid aging, and biological indestructibility. In a person who lives in Springfield, near a nuclear facility, drinking the local water, the radiation theory does not flinch at this explanation. It accommodates it. Molman is what happens when the mutation is neither a simple reduction in capacity nor a simple amplification of it, but something more chaotic. A scrambling of the fundamental relationship between biological time and biological resilience that produces results the categories of normal aging and normal vitality cannot contain. Springfield does not ask about Molman. It does not investigate the recurring deaths or the apparent age discrepancy or the physical impossibility of a man who is simultaneously ancient and young, simultaneously fragile and unkillable. Springfield simply incorporates him, the way it incorporates all the impossible things into the background, into the texture, into the ambient strangeness that everyone has agreed to treat as unremarkable. He shows up, he dies, he comes back. This is simply what Molman does. The way the plant simply hums, and the fish simply have 3 eyes, and the principal simply is not who he says he is. It is fine. Everything in Springfield is fine. Now, Ned Flanders. Ned Flanders is the character who has been most consistently and most systematically destroyed by a show that appears, on the surface, to be celebrating him. He lives next door to Homer. He has been there since the beginning. This slightly too cheerful, slightly too patient, relentlessly kind man in the green cardigan, whose every interaction with Homer involves some version of being taken advantage of and then forgiving the person who took advantage of him, often before they have asked for forgiveness and occasionally before they have even finished the act of taking advantage. On the surface, Ned is Springfield's best person. By any objective measure, his generosity with his time and possessions, his civic engagement, his parenting, his treatment of his neighbors, including and especially the neighbor who has done him the most consistent harm across 3.5 decades, Ned Flanders scores higher than anyone in his community. He is what a good person looks like in practice, not in theory. He is what goodness looks like when it is habitual rather than occasional. And the show rewards him for this by giving him a life of quiet, sustained, relentless suffering. His first wife, Maude, died at a NASCAR event when a promotional t-shirt cannon misfired. The t-shirts were aimed at Homer, who dodged them. Maude was sitting nearby. The shirts hit Maude instead. She died from the impact, and the trajectory that led to her death runs directly through Homer's reflexive self-preservation in a moment that cost Ned everything. Homer's selfishness killed Ned's wife, and Ned forgave him. He always forgives. He is constitutionally incapable of holding a grudge against Homer, which is one of the most consistently useful character traits the show has ever built, because it allows Homer to harm Ned repeatedly without consequence, without the narrative requiring any accountability from Homer or any real change in their relationship. The show explained this eventually. In an episode where Ned has a complete psychological collapse, a hurricane destroys his house. The community rebuilds it with the careless, cheerful incompetence that Springfield brings to most collective efforts, and the rebuilt house collapses almost immediately. And Ned, standing amid the ruins, does something he has never done before. He stops performing. He stops being Ned Flanders. He says what he actually thinks about Homer and about Springfield and about the way his life has gone, despite his genuine and sustained effort to live it well. And then he is institutionalized. In the mental health facility, the show provides the key to Ned's behavior that retroactively reframes everything he has ever done. Ned was not always kind. As a child, he was violent, uncontrollable, and what the show describes as a behavioral disaster. His parents' beatniks who did not believe in discipline took him to a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through what the show frames as behavioral reprogramming, a sustained, intensive intervention that went deep enough to alter the way Ned relates to his own emotional responses. The kindness is not natural. It was put there. The patience is not character, it is conditioning. The forgiveness is not spiritual grace, but a programmed response, a learned behavior that sits so deep in Ned's psychological infrastructure that it fires automatically, without choice, whenever the trigger appears. Ned cannot be angry at Homer the way a normal person would be angry after a lifetime of this. His brain was rewired, as a child, to suppress exactly that kind of response. The anger is in there. The psychiatrist makes clear that it never left, was never resolved, was simply buried under decades of behavioral modification, but accessing it requires a catastrophic failure of the conditioning, the kind of failure that sends him to a mental health facility when it finally happens. His patience with Homer is not saintly. It is pathological. He literally cannot do otherwise. His faith is the natural companion to this. If you cannot acknowledge the damage being done to you, if your brain has been wired to convert anger into forgiveness faster than it can be consciously experienced, you need a framework that makes sense of what is happening to you. A framework that says the suffering has a purpose, that the endless patience is spiritually meaningful, that somewhere in the architecture of the universe there is a reason for all of this, that makes it not merely endurance but participation in something larger. That is what faith does for Ned. It is not decoration. It is infrastructure. It is the load-bearing wall of a psychological structure that would otherwise have nowhere to put the accumulated weight of what his life has actually been. And here is the detail that the show includes and then, characteristically, does not develop. God talks to Homer multiple times in multiple episodes across the show's run. Homer has face-to-face conversations with God. He receives divine attention, divine engagement, divine response to his specific situation and questions. God knows Homer's name. God has opinions about Homer's life. God is, to Homer, accessible. Ned has never had a conversation with God. Ned goes to church every Sunday. He prays with genuine devotion. He has oriented his entire life around his faith in a way that Homer has not even come close to. Ned is the most earnest, most committed religious practitioner in Springfield. His faith is not a cultural habit or a social obligation. It is the thing that keeps him functional, the framework without which his programmed patience would have nothing to support it. And God, in the show's own established reality, has never spoken to him. The drunk who sleeps through church gets divine conversation. The man who has dedicated his life to devotion gets silence. This is not random. The show is not simply being careless about which characters get divine attention. It is saying something specific about how the universe of Springfield distributes its rewards, and that something is this. Springfield rewards compliance. It rewards not knowing. It rewards the fog of radiation-damaged cognition that keeps Homer placid and present and unable to fully understand his situation. It rewards, in short, exactly the kind of person who poses no threat to the existing arrangements of power. Ned is too aware. His awareness is buried and suppressed and conditioned away, but it is there, underneath the cardigan, and the system, the Burns-shaped, radiation-powered, collectively maintained system that keeps Springfield exactly as it is, cannot quite trust it, cannot quite let it in, cannot give Ned the divine reassurance that would make his faith stable and complete, because a Ned with stable and complete faith is a Ned who might one day, under the right circumstances, decide that the kindness he has been distributing so generously for so long ought to be redirected. Ned is what happens when you do everything right in a place that has decided not to reward rightness. He is what virtue looks like in a system that has no use for virtue. He is the clearest possible illustration of what Springfield does to people who try to live well inside it. And he is next door to Homer. Always has been. The two men whose lives represent the opposite extremes of what Springfield produces, the man who does everything wrong and suffers no real consequences, and the man who does everything right and suffers everything living side by side on Evergreen Terrace, separated by a fence, for 36 years. The fence between them is the show's most quietly devastating image. That gap, that few feet of Springfield air, has never closed. It is not going to close. The system is not designed to close it. Homer will stay exactly where he is, and Ned will stay exactly where he is, and the distance between what they deserve and what they each receive will remain fixed and permanent as long as the show continues to run. That is Springfield. That has always been Springfield. Rest now, in the texture of it, in the quiet sadness of a man in a green cardigan who says diddly and does good and gets nothing back, in the strange comedy of a tiny old man who keeps dying and keeps returning, in all the small impossible things that fill the background of a show that has been running for 36 years and has never run out of things to embed in its margins. The show is always doing something in the margins, something patient and quiet and easy to miss if you are moving at the speed of a laugh track. We are not moving at that speed tonight. We have one more stop. Section 12. The loop, why we trap them, and why we need them to stay. We began tonight in Springfield, and we are going to end there. Not because we have solved anything the mysteries of Springfield do not resolve. They accumulate, they deepen, they shed light on each other without arriving at a final accounting that closes every open question. We have spent the night looking at them closely, and looking closely has revealed new details and new connections that were not visible from a distance. But the questions themselves remain. Who really shot Mr. Burns? What the plant has actually done to the people living around it? Whether Homer is dreaming? How Burns is still alive? What Maggie is waiting to do? Where exactly this impossible town is sitting on the surface of a country that does not have room for it? These questions do not close. And that is not a failure of the theories or a limitation of the analysis. It is the nature of Springfield itself. Springfield was not built to have answers. It was built to have questions. Let us talk about the floating timeline, because it is the thread that ties every other mystery together, and because it is the one that speaks most directly to why we are here, at this hour, still moving through a cartoon town that has not changed since before many of the people watching were born. Bart Simpson was 10 years old when The Simpsons debuted on the 17th of December, 1989. He is 10 years old now, in whatever year you are watching this. Lisa was 8 in 1989. She is 8 now. Maggie was approximately 1, give or take whatever precision the show was applying to her age at the time. Homer and Marge were roughly in their middle 30s. They are still in their middle 30s. The house on Evergreen Terrace looks the same as it did in the first season. The plant has not been updated or renovated. The town has not grown or shrunk in any meaningful way. Springfield exists in a permanent present tense. The present is always the present, and the characters are always the age they were when the show began, and nothing accumulates in the way that time accumulates in real places and real lives. The technical term for this is the floating timeline. It is standard practice for long-running animated shows. The present slides forward while the characters stay fixed so that the show can reference current events without requiring the characters to have aged proportionally. This is a production decision, a creative choice, a standard tool in the television writer's kit. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has become something more than a production choice. It has been running long enough that the gap between the frozen characters and the moving world has become so vast that it demands explanation in a way that a show that has been on for 5 or 6 years does not. Bart has been 10 years old for 36 years. The contradiction this creates is not minor, it is structural. It is the show's most fundamental impossibility, and every theory we have covered tonight arrives at this impossibility from a different angle and offers a different explanation for it. The coma theory says nobody ages because Homer cannot update them. They are frozen at the moment of his last memory. The radiation theory says nobody ages because their biology has been altered at the cellular level by decades of contamination that has disrupted the normal mechanisms of aging. The collective denial theory says nobody ages because Springfield has voted, repeatedly and collectively, to maintain the fiction that nothing changes, that time does not pass here the way it passes elsewhere, that the comfortable stasis of the eternal present is preferable to the discomfort of a world that acknowledges its own movement through time. The Burns immortality theory notes that at least one person in Springfield has found a way, through technology and wealth and weekly radiation maintenance, to step outside the normal relationship between biological age and calendar time, which means the concept of aging is already negotiable in this universe, already a thing that money and resources can influence, which opens the question of whether something similar is happening to everyone else in town. Each theory is saying the same thing in a different language. Time does not work in Springfield. Something has broken, or been broken, or was always broken in the specific and peculiar way this town has always been broken. And the result is a place where the same family sits on the same couch in the same house every week, going through versions of the same lives, while the world outside changes around them and they remain exactly as they were. The show knows this is impossible. It has always known, and it has, across its run, depicted the possibility of its characters aging, shown it, demonstrated it, rendered it in specific and emotionally resonant detail, and then pulled away from it every time. Lisa's wedding is the most important single episode in the history of The Simpsons, for reasons that have nothing to do with its quality, which is considerable, or its comedy, which is sharp. It is important because of what it demonstrates about the relationship between the show and time. In Lisa's wedding, a flash-forward episode from the 6th season, we see Lisa at 23. She is completing her education. She is engaged to a young Englishman. She is the person the show has always been building toward: brilliant, principled, idealistic. Still lonely in the specific way that brilliant and principled idealists tend to be lonely, still searching for the kind of connection that takes her seriously. She is recognizably herself, but grown, evolved, changed in the specific ways that time changes people when it is permitted to do so. The episode is beautiful. It is one of the most emotionally generous things the show has ever done, imagining its characters as adults with the kind of care and detail that suggests the writers knew exactly who these people would become if the show let them. The future it depicts is not fantastic or satirical in the usual mode. It is recognizably realistic, grounded in the logical extrapolation of who these characters are at 8 and 10 and 35. And then the episode ends. Lisa returns to being 8. The future is locked away. The flash forward was a single episode, a glimpse through a window that immediately closed. The show can imagine its characters aging. It refuses to allow them to. That is the key distinction, and it is one worth sitting with. This is not a show that cannot envision growth. It has envisioned it, specifically and beautifully, more than once. It is a show that has decided, for reasons that go beyond production convenience, that growth is not what this particular story is for. Why? Here is where we arrive, finally, at the answer that is more honest than any of the theories and less comfortable than any of the explanations. We trapped them. Not the writers. Not Burns. Not the radiation or the coma or the collective denial mechanism of Springfield's civic life. We did. The audience. The people who have been watching this show since 1989, or since the syndication caught up with them in the mid-90s, or since the streaming era made the whole archive available, or since they were children watching it in the house they grew up in, on a television that no longer exists. We need them to stay as they are. The Simpsons are the American family. Not a particular American family, not a realistic one, not one that maps cleanly onto any actual household in any actual zip code. The American family, the distilled, composite, universalized idea of what a family is, what it feels like to grow up in one, what it means to come home to one, what it costs, and what it gives, and what it takes from you and what it gives back. Homer must be middle-aged because a Homer who has retired is a Homer who is past the specific moment in a man's life that he represents, the moment of striving and failing and trying again, of not quite measuring up to what you thought you would be and learning to love the life you have anyway. An old Homer is a Homer whose story has concluded, and the story of American fatherhood in the late 20th century and early 21st does not get to conclude. It is too important to let end. Marge must be patient and present because a Marge who has reached the end of her patience, who has decided, after 36 years, that the house on Evergreen Terrace does not contain enough of what she needs to stay, would be the end of something that the audience cannot afford to see end. Marge's presence is the gravitational center of the Springfield solar system. If she moves, everything falls apart, and so she does not move. Bart must be rebellious and 10 years old because a Bart who has grown up and faced the consequences of the person his early years were building is a Bart who has ceased to be the thing he represents, the eternal resistant child, the kid who will not do what he is told, the part of every person that never fully grows up and never fully stops testing the limits and never fully accepts that the world is what it is. If Bart turns 11, he starts to become someone else. We are not ready for that someone else. Lisa must be 8 and brilliant and frustrated because Elisa, who has left Springfield, who has gone to the university she deserves, found the peers who can match her, built a life outside the place that never quite made room for her, is Elisa, whose story is over, and Lisa's story is not allowed to be over because Lisa's story is the story of everyone who has ever been the smartest person in a room that did not reward them for it, and that story does not end by 36. And Maggie must be silent and 1-year-old and enormous-eyed and reaching, always reaching, for something just out of her grasp, because Maggie is the version of ourselves that we have not yet become, the potential we have not yet realized, the thing we are still gathering ourselves toward, still watching and waiting and preparing for, the act we have not yet decided to perform. If Maggie speaks, if she finally says the second word, the third, the sentence, the declaration, then she is no longer the symbol of unrealized possibility. She is a person with a perspective, and a person with a perspective has to live with the consequences of holding it, and the audience is not ready for Maggie to have consequences. So she stays silent. We keep her silent. We tune in every week and she has the pacifier and the enormous eyes and the silence, and we are safe for another episode in the knowledge that the potential is still there, still intact, still waiting. That is the loop. We built it. We maintain it. Every time we watch, we tighten it a little more. We make it a little harder for the Simpsons to escape. Because if they escape, if the timeline lands instead of floats, if Bart turns 11 and Lisa moves away and Maggie says something and Homer grows old, then the show ends. And the show ending means admitting that 36 years have passed. That the couch we sat on as children watching this is gone, or different, or in a house that belongs to someone else. That the people we were when we first met these characters have changed as much as The Simpsons have refused to. The show is not keeping us from aging. We are using it to tell ourselves that we have not. Every time we press play on an episode, any episode, from any season, any year we return to a place where the family is intact, and the kids are young, and the house looks the same, and Homer will stumble through the door at 5:30, having had another disastrous day and recovered from it the way he always recovers from everything. We go home to Evergreen Terrace. We sit down on the couch, and for however long the episode lasts, we are back. That return is not trivial. It is not something that can be easily explained away as consumer habit, or brand loyalty, or the inertia of a long-running show. It is something more personal than that, more fundamental, more tied to the specific way that The Simpsons has embedded itself in the lives of the people who grew up with it. We need them to not change because we are afraid of what it means that we have. That fear is not shameful. It is human. It is the specific, tender, slightly heartbreaking human refusal to let go of the version of the world that felt safe. The version where the family was always together, and the house always looked the same, and the couch was always orange, and the television was always on, and everything, in the end, was always going to be fine. Springfield is not a town. It is a promise. A promise the show makes at the beginning of every episode when the opening credits roll and the school bus and the skateboard and the car all converge on the driveway, and the family piles onto the couch, and the cat gets squashed, and the joke lands, and the theme music swells. The promise is, we are here. We are here, and we are the same, and you can come home to us. That promise has been kept for 36 years. Through 400 and something presidents, and a handful of economic collapses, and a pandemic, and several technological revolutions, and the complete transformation of how we consume and share and think about television. Through everything that has changed in the actual world, the promise of Springfield has remained. We are here, and the mysteries are the shadow of that promise. The dark underside of the warmth, the thing you find when you look at the comfort long enough and from close enough that the seams become visible, the radiation that is making the warmth, and the damage that is the cost of the warmth, and the dreaming man who is the source of the warmth, and the lie that the warmth requires to sustain itself, you can hold both of those things at once. The comfort and the darkness underneath it. The love and the loss that the love is built on. The family and everything that has been done to that family by the world they live in. That, ultimately, is what the theories are doing. They are not trying to ruin the show. They are not trying to make the comedy into tragedy. They are trying to see the whole thing, the whole Springfield, the whole story, the whole 36 years of it, clearly enough that the experience of it deepens into something that goes beyond the laugh track and the couch gag. Something that takes Homer's stupidity and traces it back to the system that needed him stupid. Something that takes Maggie's silence and finds the intelligence choosing it. Something that takes Burns's immortality and follows it all the way down to what it costs the people who have spent their lives in the shadow of the thing keeping him alive. Something that takes the whole impossible town, with its impossible geography and its impossible biology and its impossible people who never age and its impossible billionaire who refuses to die, and holds it up to the light and says, look at what this is. Look at what it has been doing all this time while you were laughing. Look at what it says about us, that we love it as much as we do. The mystery is not Springfield. Springfield is just a cartoon town. The mystery is us. The people who pressed pause in 1989 and never pressed play. The people for whom Bart being 10 is not a limitation of the show's format, but a comfort, a relief, a small reprieve from the continuous and irreversible forward movement of actual time. We built the loop. We keep it running. We will keep running it until we do not. And on the day we stop, on the day the show finally ends, on the day we press play on the last episode and watch the credits roll for the last time, we will have to sit with the full weight of what it meant that we held on this long. We will have to sit with 36 years. And maybe that is why the show keeps going. Not because the writers have more stories to tell, not because the ratings justify another season, not because anyone involved has a compelling creative reason to continue. Maybe the show keeps going because we have not been ready for the ending. Because the ending means something that we are not yet equipped to face. On the day The Simpsons ends, Bart will finally turn 11. Lisa will finally be 9. Maggie will finally speak her second word. And it will be something that will make sense later, something that will have been obvious in retrospect, the way all great character reveals are obvious in retrospect. And Homer will finally really wake up. From the couch, from the dream, from whatever it is he has been in for 36 years, and he will look around the house on Evergreen Terrace, at the orange carpet and the painting of the sailboat and the television in the corner, and he will see Marge standing in the kitchen doorway with the expression she has always had, patient and slightly worried and quietly devoted. And Bart will be somewhere in the house making noise, and Lisa will be somewhere else, playing her saxophone, and Maggie will be in her high chair, reaching. And it will be exactly the same as it always was. And it will be over. But not tonight. Tonight the loop is still running. Tonight Springfield is still there, under its slightly wrong-colored sky, with the plant humming on the horizon and the tire fire burning somewhere out of frame, and a family asleep in a yellow house on a street that does not exist on any map. They are exactly as you left them. They will be exactly the same when you come back. That is the whole point. That has always been the whole point. Springfield will be there. You do not have to hold on to it. It is already holding on to you. Let the sounds around you become part of the night. Let your breathing slow to the rhythm of something slower than thought. Let Springfield settle into the background, the way the plant's hum settles into the background, always there, becoming ambient, becoming part of the texture of the place rather than something you have to notice. You have been in Springfield tonight. You have walked through its streets and looked at its impossible sky and sat with its mysteries and held them up to the light. You have seen what is buried underneath the couch gag and the laugh track and the 36 years of a family that refused to change. You have seen the love underneath all of it. The damaged, radiation-contaminated, possibly dreaming, definitely conspired against love that the show has been depicting in a yellow house on Evergreen Terrace since the 17th of December, 1989. It is still there. It will still be there. Breathe. The night is quiet. The plant is humming. Homer is asleep. Let's go home. The end of script. Total structure. Section 1. The town that time forgot. To 4,100 words. Section 2. The poison underneath. To 4,800 words. Section 3. Homer's coma and the dream that never ended. To 4,600 words. Section 4. Who really shot Mr. Burns to 4,500 words. Section 5. The immortal billionaire to 4,200 words. Section 6. Maggie's secret to 4,100 words. Section 7. The mother who vanished to 4,300 words. Section 8. The town that voted for the lie. to 4,200 words. Section 9. Springfield has no address to 3,900 words. Section 10. The predictions to 4,400 words. Section 11. The ones we forgot to 4,600 words. Section 12. The loop to 4,500 words. Estimated total to 52,300 words. Section 2. Expansion additional material. The plant's relationship with Springfield. There is a man named Frank Grimes, and his story may be the most important thing The Simpsons ever did, even though the show itself does not seem to have fully registered what it was saying. Frank Grimes appeared in a single episode in the 8th season. He was a man who had worked extraordinarily hard for everything he had ever achieved. His childhood was difficult. He had no advantages and made no excuses for having none. He studied. He earned his credentials through effort and sacrifice. He got a position at the Springfield nuclear power plant and took it seriously in the way that people take seriously the things they had to fight to obtain. And then he met Homer Simpson. The episode's premise is built around Frank Grimes's horror at Homer's existence, not disgust, exactly horror. The specific, slow-building, increasingly desperate horror of a man who has followed the rules his entire life and worked harder than nearly anyone around him, watching someone who has done none of those things receive equal or better treatment at every turn. Homer sleeps at his desk. Homer eats during safety warnings. Homer has a trophy on his shelf from a nuclear disaster he somehow turned into a positive outcome. Homer has photos on his wall of encounters with celebrities and presidents. Homer, by every objective standard, is less qualified for his position than almost anyone the plant has ever employed, and yet Homer is there, has always been there, is apparently going to be there indefinitely regardless of what he does or fails to do. Frank Grimes tries to expose this. He challenges Homer to a children's model reactor competition, assuming that Homer, incompetent, careless, indifferent to quality, will perform poorly, and the contrast with a real professional will be obvious. Homer wins. Of course Homer wins. Not because Homer is secretly capable, but because the system that operates in Springfield does not reward competence. It rewards the kind of comfortable, cheerful, unaware participation that Homer provides so naturally and so completely. Frank Grimes unravels. He starts imitating Homer. He starts doing exactly what Homer does, ignoring safety protocols, handling equipment carelessly, laughing at inappropriate moments. He grabs electrical wires without gloves, mockingly saying that he is Homer Simpson and he does not need safety equipment, and he is electrocuted and he dies. Frank Grimes died from trying to demonstrate how dangerous Homer's behavior actually was. At the funeral, and this is where the episode earns its reputation as one of the show's darkest moments. Homer falls asleep and starts talking in his sleep. He says something cheerful and meaningless. The crowd laughs. The funeral for a man who just died precisely because the world does not hold people like Homer accountable becomes, within moments of the body being buried, another occasion for the community to laugh at Homer's antics and feel warmly toward him. Springfield did not learn anything from Frank Grimes. Springfield could not learn anything from Frank Grimes, because learning the lesson Frank Grimes was trying to teach would require the town to confront its entire relationship with the power plant and with Burns, and with the comfortable arrangement that keeps the lights on at the cost of everything Frank Grimes was trying to protect. Frank Grimes was an outsider. He arrived in Springfield without the benefit of having grown up in its particular atmosphere, without the years of gradual exposure that have dimmed the critical faculties of everyone around him. He could see what they could not because he had not been marinating in the same water for the same length of time. He came in from outside the contamination zone, and he saw Springfield clearly, in the way that an outsider always sees a thing more clearly than someone who has always been inside it. And what he saw horrified him, and Springfield killed him for seeing it. Not literally, not through any deliberate act, but the environment that allows Homer to exist the way Homer exists in Sector 7G is also the environment that is lethal to someone who tries to hold it to account. Frank Grimes could not survive in Springfield because Springfield is not built for people like Frank Grimes. It is built for people like Homer. Damaged, pliant, undemanding, grateful for the position regardless of the conditions. The radiation theory would say this is because Springfield's contaminated environment has shaped its population to be exactly that undemanding, pliant, incapable of the kind of sustained critical attention that would be required to challenge the plant or Burns, or the fundamental arrangement that the plant and Burns represent. Frank Grimes came in from outside and immediately saw what the people inside had spent decades being conditioned not to see. And the strain of being the only clear-sighted person in a room full of people who have been cognitively compromised by their environment was, in the end, more than he could bear. He is not a cautionary tale about ambition or resentment. He is a cautionary tale about clarity. In Springfield, clarity is fatal. Seeing things as they are is the most dangerous thing you can do. The plant itself has a physical presence in the show that goes beyond establishing shot. It appears in the background of Springfield's landscape with the same consistency as the sky, always there, always visible on the right horizon, its cooling towers serving as the town's most recognizable landmark and its most constant reminder of what the town depends on and what the town has sacrificed for that dependence. There is something almost hypnotic about those towers, rendered in the show's particular style simplified into their essential shape, two identical concrete forms against whatever color the sky happens to be in any given shot. They are the first thing you see in many of the show's establishing shots, and the last thing you see before the frame cuts to the interior of wherever the story is taking place. They bracket Springfield's life, and they are cracked. This is not incidental. The safety inspection that found 342 violations specifically noted that the cooling towers were in a state of significant physical deterioration, cracked, patched in places with materials that were not designed to be structural supports for nuclear cooling infrastructure. Chewing gum, the show suggests, at one particularly memorable moment, someone plugged a crack in a nuclear cooling tower with chewing gum. This is comedy. It is meant to be funny. And it is funny in the specific way that absurdist exaggeration of real-world dangers is funny when you are at a safe distance from the danger. But there is something underneath the comedy that the laugh track does not address, something that sits in the image of a cracked cooling tower and a wad of gum and does not resolve into a punchline. For 36 years, people have been living in Springfield under those towers, drinking the water that flows past them, breathing the air that moves over them, eating food grown in soil beneath them. And those towers have been cracked, variously patched, imperfectly maintained, and supervised by a safety inspector who falls asleep at his desk for the entire run of the series. The damage is cumulative. That is what the theories are saying, all of them, in their different ways. The damage is cumulative and slow and invisible, to the people experiencing it the way all the most significant damage tends to be. You do not feel your bones losing density. You do not feel your neurons misfiring with greater frequency. You do not feel the gradual degradation of the cellular machinery that keeps you the same person you were last year and the year before. You just become, over time, slightly less than you were, and if the change is slow enough and the environment consistent enough, you never register that anything has changed at all. Springfield has never registered that anything has changed. It cannot. The same thing that caused the change has also compromised the ability to perceive it. That is the full horror of the radiation theory, stated plainly. The contamination that is damaging Springfield is also damaging the capacity of Springfield's residents to recognize the contamination. The plant is not just poisoning the water. It is poisoning the awareness that would identify the poison in the water. It is a system that self-perpetuates not through conspiracy, though Burns's deliberate choices add a layer of intentionality that makes it worse, but through a feedback loop in which the harm creates the conditions for the harm to continue. Dumb the population down enough and they will stop asking questions about what made them this way. Give the dumbest among them the most critical safety role and the violations will continue indefinitely. Maintain the economic dependency of the entire town on the facility doing the damage, and no one will have the structural standing to demand that the damage stop. It is elegant, in the horrifying way that self-sustaining systems are always elegant. The machine maintains itself. Burns does not have to do very much, at this point, to keep Springfield exactly as it needs to be. The contamination is doing most of the work. The dependency is doing the rest. And Homer, in Sector 7G, is doing his small but essential part by ensuring that nobody on the inside of the facility is looking at this clearly. Let us sit for a moment with what all of this means for the people we care about most in Springfield. Not for Burns, who is insulated from the worst of the damage by his medical protocols and his resources. For the Simpsons, For the family on Evergreen Terrace, who has been at the center of this story for 36 years, Homer and Marge moved into that house before their children were born. They were already in Springfield, already drinking the water, already breathing the air. When Bart was born, he entered a body that had been developing inside a mother who had been exposed to Springfield's environment for years before his conception. When Lisa was born, the same was true. When Maggie was born, the accumulation was even greater, the exposure even more extensive, the biological context in which she developed already shaped by everything that had been in the environment for the years of her parents' residence. The show has always been a family story. It has always been, at its core, about what a family is and what it costs to hold one together and what it means to love people who are imperfect, who disappoint you, who are shaped by forces you cannot control into versions of themselves that are not always easy to be around. The radiation theory does not change any of that. It just adds a dimension to it. It says that the forces shaping this family, the forces that make Homer who he is, that shape Bart's impulses, that amplify something in Lisa, that are doing whatever they are doing to the extraordinary quiet of Maggie, are not just the random accidents of personality and circumstance. They are environmental. They are external. They were introduced into this family's story before the family had any way to recognize them, or consent to them, or protect themselves against them. That is the tragedy underneath the comedy. Not Homer's pratfalls or Marge's worrying or Bart's pranks. The tragedy is that this family, which loves each other with a completeness that the show returns to again and again as its emotional center, has been damaged by something they cannot see, cannot name, cannot protect themselves from, and cannot escape, because the thing that is damaging them is also the thing that keeps the lights on in their house. They are trapped in a beautiful, glowing, slightly contaminated trap. And the trap looks exactly like home. Section 3. Expansion. The coma. What Homer hears in the hospital room. There is a specific quality to the way the post-coma Simpsons handles celebrity guest appearances that the theory illuminates in a way that is difficult to unsee once you have noticed it. In the first 4 seasons, celebrity appearances are relatively rare and tend to involve musicians or actors who have specific, thematically relevant connections to the episodes they appear in. The celebrities feel like choices considered decisions by writers who wanted a particular person for a particular reason. The appearances are integrated. They belong to the episodes they inhabit. After the coma, the celebrity appearances begin to multiply. By the middle seasons, they are ubiquitous. By the later seasons, they are almost reflexive. A celebrity appears because the show can get one, not necessarily because the episode demands one. And the celebrities become more random, less integrated, more like fragments of famous person material that have been inserted into the narrative without quite fitting. The coma theory says this is because Homer's dreaming brain is not curating the celebrities. It is not making deliberate artistic choices about which famous people should appear in its simulation. It is simply absorbing whatever comes through. Think about what the ambient noise of a hospital room sounds like from the inside of a coma. The television is on somewhere, cycling through programming news, entertainment, daytime talk shows, late-night programs. Doctors and nurses talk to each other and to the family sitting beside the bed. Visitors come in and mention things they have seen or heard. The radio in the hallway. The conversations of other patients audible through walls that are not quite soundproof. All of it reaching Homer through the fog, processed by a brain that is running at diminished capacity but still running, still absorbing, still trying to make sense of the input it is receiving. A name gets mentioned on the television, a voice Homer vaguely recognizes. His brain files it away. Later, in the dream, the name becomes a face, becomes a character, shows up in Springfield doing something that the narrative requires. The celebrity's presence in the dream is not scripted by any deliberate creative agency. It is the residue of passive absorption, the detritus of a media-saturated hospital room, filtered through an unconscious brain that can no longer distinguish between the important information and the incidental. That is why the later season celebrity appearances feel the way they do. They feel random because they are, in a sense, random. They are the product of a process that has no criteria for selection beyond availability. Homer's sleeping brain received the signal and incorporated it the way dreams incorporate the sounds around you without deciding whether those sounds are worth incorporating. This also explains the episodic nature of the show's later seasons in a way that the coma theory finds illuminating. Early seasons of The Simpsons have a continuity between episodes, a sense that what happens in one episode matters to the next, that the characters carry their experiences forward, that time in Springfield is connected across episodes rather than reset between them. The Simpsons, in those early seasons, is a show with a world. After the coma, the continuity degrades. Individual episodes become more self-contained. What happens in one story does not affect the next. Characters forget their experiences between episodes with a completeness that goes beyond any normal elasticity of cartoon logic. The world becomes progressively more fragmented. This is the degradation pattern of a dream, not the narrative choices of writers who have lost interest in continuity. Dreams cycle. They restart. They do not maintain consistent world-building between sleep cycles because there is no mechanism in the dreaming brain for transferring the context of one dream cycle into the next. Each cycle begins fresh, with whatever material the dreaming mind has available, the people it loves, the places it has been, the feelings that persist through unconsciousness, but without the accumulated context of previous cycles. Homer does not remember, from one episode to the next, the consequences of the previous episode. His dreaming brain has not retained them. Each episode is the dream cycle of a particular night, beginning fresh, drawing from the same material the family, the house, the town, the plant, the neighbors, the recurring cast of Springfield characters, but without the thread of continuity that waking memory provides. The dream is not a consistent world. It is a recurring one. The same characters in the same places going through different situations, with the emotional constant being the same in every cycle. Homer wants to be home. Homer wants his family to be okay. Homer wants Marge to still love him, and Bart to still be his mischievous boy, and Lisa to still be reaching, and Maggie to still be safe. Every episode gives him that. Every episode, regardless of the plot, regardless of the catastrophe, ends with the family intact. Back together, home. That is what the coma gives Homer that the waking world might not be giving him anymore. Complete, reliable, unconditional return. No matter what happens in any given episode, no matter how far from home the story takes the characters, how badly things go, how dire the circumstances become, they always come back. The family always reconstitutes. Evergreen Terrace is always there. In the dream, the home is permanent, the return is guaranteed. The family cannot be lost because the dreaming mind will not allow them to be. Outside the dream, in the hospital room where Homer's body has been lying since April 1993, the situation is not guaranteed. Time has passed. An unknown amount of time, because from Homer's perspective no time has passed, but from the perspective of the real world where the clock has kept moving, time has passed. His children have been growing. Marge has been aging. The house on Evergreen Terrace has been filling with the specific, accumulating texture of a life lived without one of its central members. Homer does not know this. He cannot know this. He is asleep. And so his dreaming mind gives him the version it can maintain, the one where everything is still exactly as it was, the one where no time has passed and nothing has changed, and the family is still the family he last saw before the vending machine fell. There is an executive producer named Al Jean who has said, publicly and on the record, that the coma theory is not true. Homer is not in a coma. This is a show about a cartoon family, and the premise of the show is that the family is real within the show's universe, and the things that happen to them are real within the show's universe, and there is no nested dream logic operating underneath the surface of what you are watching. Al Jean is probably right. He knows the show better than any theorist can. He was in the room when the decisions were made, and yet, there is a version of the coma theory that does not require it to be literally true to be true in the way that matters. There is a version of it that says, regardless of what the writers intended, the show has created, through the accumulation of its own evidence, a structure that supports the theory as a reading even if it was never authored as one. The theory is true as an interpretation even if it was not true as a design. That distinction matters. Stories often contain more than their authors put in. The meaning of a work is not bounded by the conscious intentions of the people who made it. The Simpsons has been made by hundreds of people over 36 years, and the accumulated output of all those people, all those choices, all those jokes and callbacks and character moments has produced something that contains the coma theory as a valid framework, even if no single writer ever sat down to write it as one. The theory is there. It is supported by the evidence the show provides. And whether it was put there on purpose or grew there through the natural accumulation of a very long story, it is as true as any other truth the show contains. Section 6. Expansion Maggie and the language of strategic silence. The thing about silence, as a strategy, is that it requires sustained discipline. It is not passivity. It looks like passivity from the outside, which is precisely its value. But maintaining silence in the face of things you understand and things you want to react to and things that are happening around you that you have opinions about, that is active. That is work. Maggie's silence, under this framework, is one of the most disciplined performances in the history of the show. Consider the occasions on which she would have every reasonable justification for speaking. The family is in crisis, repeatedly, and Maggie has information or capacity that would help. She sees things the others do not see. She understands situations that have escaped the adults around her. She makes calculations and forms conclusions and arrives at decisions that are consistently correct in the evidence we have been given. And she acts on those decisions in silence, through physical action rather than verbal communication. She could speak. She could say, "I have figured this out." She could say, "I know what is happening here." She could say, "Listen to me," and save us all the time and trouble of watching the adults fumble toward the solution she already has. She does not, because speaking would change everything. Speaking would make her visible in a way that she has calculated correctly is not in her interest. Speaking would make her a target not in the cartoon sense of a character who becomes a villain's focus, but in the social sense that every intelligent child who makes themselves visible in a world that does not know what to do with their intelligence understands viscerally and personally. Lisa speaks. Lisa has always spoken. Lisa has never been able to stop speaking, because Lisa's intelligence and Lisa's conscience and Lisa's deep, consistent, burning need to be heard and understood and engaged with at the level she operates at. All of that drives her toward expression, toward the word, toward the saxophone and the debate club and the raised hand in class and the argument with the family at the dinner table. And Lisa is the loneliest character in Springfield. Lisa is the one whose intelligence has cost her the most, who has received the least in proportion to what she has invested, who has fought the hardest for recognition and obtained the least of it. Lisa's visible brilliance has been her greatest gift and her greatest vulnerability simultaneously. Maggie watched this happen. She watched it from her high chair, and she watched it from the back seat of the car, and she watched it from the living room floor where she sat with her toys and looked like she was playing and was actually doing something else. Entirely. She watched her sister fight and lose and fight again and lose again, and she drew from that watching a conclusion that Lisa herself has never quite managed to reach. The fight costs more than the fight is worth. That is not cynicism in Maggie's case. It is analysis. The data is available in the form of Lisa's ongoing experience, and the data says, visible intelligence in Springfield is punished. Authority in Springfield responds to visible intelligence with resistance. The family in Springfield, which loves its members completely and specifically, still cannot accommodate the full weight of Lisa's brilliance and gives her only a fraction of what she deserves. Maggie looks at this and makes a choice that Lisa cannot make, because Lisa's temperament and Homer's DNA and Marge's heart combined in her in a way that makes silence impossible for her, that makes the word necessary, that makes the fight worthwhile regardless of the cost. Maggie's combination is different. She has the intelligence without the temperament that drives it outward. She has the capacity without the compulsion toward expression. She can hold what she knows inside herself with the kind of patience that suggests it is not actually patience at all, but something closer to confidence. She is not waiting because she has to. She is waiting because she has decided that waiting is correct. That is a profoundly adult thing for a 1-year-old to do. And it connects back to the larger question of what Springfield does to the people inside it. Because in a healthy environment, in a town that was not contaminated, that was not organized around the economic interest of a single man, whose interest is served by a cognitively impaired population, Maggie's silence would not be necessary. In a healthy Springfield, a child of Maggie's apparent intelligence would be visible, would be celebrated, would have the resources and the attention and the context to develop fully and to be seen clearly for what she was. But Springfield is not a healthy environment. And in Springfield, The smartest strategy available to someone who wants to actually accomplish things is the one Maggie has adopted. Be invisible. Let them underestimate you. Operate in the margins, in the spaces between the things that other people are watching, and build your capacity quietly, incrementally, without announcing yourself until the moment when announcement is strategic rather than compulsive. The shooting, whatever you believe about who actually pulled the trigger, demonstrated the effectiveness of this approach. A baby was identified as the person who shot Mr. Burns, and the investigation was closed, and no charges were filed because you cannot charge a baby, and Maggie went back to being a baby. She went back to the high chair and the pacifier and the enormous eyes and the reaching. She went back to being exactly what everyone expected, and the case closed. If Maggie is innocent, if she did not pull the trigger, if the shooting was Homer's or Marge's or someone else's and Maggie simply witnessed it, then the strategic value of her silence is clear. A speaking Maggie might have said what she saw. A speaking Maggie might have deflected the blame. A speaking Maggie would have been a witness with testimony, a participant in the investigation, a person who would be asked questions and expected to provide answers. A silent Maggie was easier to blame and easier to let go. If Maggie is guilty, if she did pull the trigger, deliberately or accidentally, then the silence is equally strategic. She has nothing to say in her defense that would not simultaneously prove that she understood what she was doing well enough to have a defense, which would undermine the argument that she was too young to be held responsible. She maintains the performance. She stays in character. She is the baby who cannot understand what is being accused of her, and therefore the charges dissolve against the surface of that performance. Either way, silence won. That is Maggie's thesis, stated through 36 years of consistent execution. In Springfield, silence wins. The less you say, the more you can do. The less they notice you, the more freedom you have to operate. She has been operating freely for 36 years. What she has been building toward, what the accumulated capacity and the accumulated knowledge and the accumulated strategic patience of 3 decades of watching everything and saying nothing amounts to remains the most genuinely open question in the show's run. But the question itself is evidence. The fact that the show has left it open has not resolved it, has not provided the answer that every other major character arc has approached, even obliquely, suggests that the writers know it is their most powerful remaining card. Maggie's endgame is the show's last real surprise. When it comes, if it comes, it will have been prepared for across the entirety of the show's run by 36 years of quiet accumulation. The rest of Springfield has been living in the noise. In Homer's chaos and Burns's schemes and the town's collective decisions and the endless, cycling, self-perpetuating arrangements of power and damage that define this place, Maggie has been living in the quiet underneath all of that. She has been there the whole time, watching. Section 9. Expansion more on Springfield's geographic impossibility. There is a specific way that people talk about the town they grew up in. When they are no longer in it, when they have moved away and return to it only in memory, and in the occasional visit that confirms how much has changed and how much has stayed the same. There is a geography of memory that is not the geography of maps. The distances are different. The scale is personal rather than cartographic. The town you carry with you in your head is assembled from emotional rather than physical logic. The places that mattered are close to each other regardless of actual distance, and the places that did not matter disappear entirely from the mental map, even if they were geographically central. Springfield is built from that kind of geography. Not the geography of any one place, but the geography of a feeling about a place, the American feeling, specifically about the kind of town that most Americans either grew up in or carry in their imagination as the town, the template community, the place that represents home in the general rather than the specific sense. The show understands this, and its understanding is what produces the geographic impossibility. You cannot locate Springfield precisely because you cannot precisely locate a feeling. You cannot GPS a memory. You cannot put a pin on a map at the exact coordinates of a sense of belonging. What you can do is describe the elements. Mountains that feel like the mountains of a road trip taken as a child. Ocean that feels like the first ocean you ever saw, or the ocean from a family vacation you keep returning to in the way you return to the best moments of your past. Farmland that feels like flyover country, like the middle of the country, like the amber waves that exist in the national imagination more vividly than they exist in any particular state. Forest that feels like the forests of childhood exploration, which were always slightly more wild and slightly more mysterious than they probably were in fact. Springfield's geography is assembled from the places that feel most like home to the broadest range of Americans, without belonging precisely to any of them. It is the feeling of home rendered in physical space. That is why it is impossible to find. You cannot find a feeling on a map, but you can find where you are when the feeling is strongest. For the people who have grown up watching this show, Springfield is located with great precision in the past. It is located in the moment when the couch gag landed and the theme music played and you were young and the world was contained enough to fit into the space of a half-hour comedy on a Sunday night. That is where Springfield is. That is the location the show has been maintaining for 36 years with extraordinary fidelity. The geographic impossibility is a consequence of trying to locate in physical space something that exists in temporal and emotional space. The show is not confused about where Springfield is. The show knows exactly where Springfield is. It is in the specific feeling of being young enough that a cartoon family on a television felt like company, felt like the world being explained to you through the lens of comedy, felt like belonging to something larger than your own immediate circumstances. You cannot draw that on a map, but you know exactly where it is. Section 12. Expansion, the ending that cannot be allowed to come. There have been, across the show's long run, moments that felt like they might be the end. Episodes that had the emotional weight of finality, that created the specific quality of air that good storytelling creates when it is approaching something important. Episodes that seemed to be reaching toward a conclusion. They were not. They never were. The show pulled back every time. The way you pull back from the edge of something high, not from fear, exactly, but from the recognition that stepping off would change things in a way that cannot be undone. The show has come closest to an ending in the episodes that deal most honestly with what the Simpsons family is and what it means. Mother Simpson is one of them. The revelation about Mona and Burns, and everything that has been done to Homer across his whole life, arrives with the emotional weight of a story that has been building towards something, and the episode's final image, Homer sitting on the hood of his car and watching the stars, carries a quality of reckoning that feels like it might be permanent, but it is not permanent. It was never going to be permanent. By the next episode, the moment has passed and Springfield has resumed its normal operations and Homer has resumed his normal function, and the knowledge of what Burns did to his mother sits somewhere in the background of his character without ever quite coming forward to demand that something be done about it. That is Springfield. That is the essential defining fact of this place, that things happen and are important and carry genuine emotional weight and then recede, return to background, become part of the accumulated and unprocessed history of a town that has decided that processing its history is too dangerous to attempt. The show, in this sense, mirrors the population it depicts. Springfield cannot process its own history. The Simpsons cannot process its own history. Both of them carry everything, every catastrophe, every revelation, every moment that should have changed something permanently in a kind of suspension, held without being resolved, present without being addressed. That suspension is what the floating timeline is at its deepest level. Not a production choice, not a cartoon convention, not even the result of whatever has been done to Springfield's water supply. A choice made by the show, made by the audience, made by everyone involved in the ongoing project of keeping Springfield alive to hold the story in the moment before the ending, forever, in the way that you can hold your breath and keep holding it, right up until the moment when you cannot anymore. The show will have an ending someday. Everything does. The day will come when the writers produce the final scene, the final couch gag, the final image of a family on a green couch in an orange room in a yellow house on a street that does not exist on any map. And on that day, Bart will turn 11, and Lisa will turn 9, and Maggie will say something, and Homer will wake up, and Marge will put down whatever she is holding and simply be there, in the room with the people she loves, in the moment that the show has been building toward since the 17th of December, 1989. It will be a good ending. The show will earn it in whatever form it takes. 36 years of storytelling does not produce a bad ending by accident, but the ending has not come yet. Tonight, Springfield is still there. Tonight, Bart is still 10, and Lisa is still 8, and Maggie is still watching from her high chair with those enormous silent eyes. Tonight, Homer is still asleep on the couch, the television's still on, the family's still intact in the specific and unconditional way that the dream requires. And you are here, at the edge of sleep yourself. Somewhere in the world at some hour of the night, with the Springfield we have been through together, settling into the background of your thoughts, the way the background of a familiar place settles when you stop looking directly at it and let it become ambient. The mysteries are not solved, they are held. Suspended in the same liquid amber that holds the Simpsons family, held without resolution because the resolution would end something that is not ready to end. You can hold them too. You can carry them into sleep. Let them drift through whatever your dreaming mind does with the things you have thought about before sleep. Let them become part of the architecture of whatever comes next for you tonight. They will be there when you come back. The questions will be exactly where you left them. Springfield will be exactly where you left it. It always is. It always will be. The plant is still humming. The sky is still slightly the wrong color. Somewhere on Evergreen Terrace, a family is sleeping in the peaceful and slightly contaminated dark. They are dreaming, or they are the dream. It does not matter which, at this hour, in this particular quality of quiet. What matters is that they are there. What matters is that you know where to find them. Go to sleep now. Springfield will keep. Additional expansion material. Section 4 Extended. The Contest Analysis. The summer between Part 1 and Part 2 of Who Shot Mr. Burns was, in cultural terms, an unusual thing. It was the summer of a cartoon mystery that a significant portion of the television-watching public was treating with the seriousness usually reserved for actual news. People were debating it at work, at family gatherings, in the early internet forums that were just beginning to become a space where television discourse could happen in real time. America's Most Wanted produced a tie-in segment treating the shooting as though it were a real unsolved crime. Morning radio hosts discussed their theories. Elementary school children had opinions. This had not happened before. An animated show had never created a genuine whodunit cliffhanger designed for mass participation. The format was traditional murder mystery married to the summer hiatus, with the national audience invited to play detective. It was a genuinely clever piece of cultural engineering, and it worked. The interest it generated over those months has never fully dissipated, because the mystery that was supposedly resolved in September 1995 kept producing questions that the resolution did not fully answer. Let us look at the clues Part 1 provided, the ones the show's creators claimed were sufficient to identify the shooter, and ask whether they actually were. The primary clue, the one the episode staged most deliberately and most visibly, was the sundial. Burns collapsed onto the town sundial with his hands resting on letters. The positioning was dramatic. It was clearly meant to mean something. The show spent time on it, lingered on it, gave the audience a chance to note it. This was the clue. This was the thing the writers wanted viewers to analyze. And then, when Burns was asked about it, he said he had not done it deliberately. He fell. His hands landed where they landed. There is a word for a clue that the victim says was not intended as a clue. The word is not evidence. The word is coincidence. The central set piece of the most elaborate mystery in animated television history was explicitly described by the mystery's primary victim as a coincidence. The show seems to have been aware of this problem. The episode where the alternate ending was revealed included a character essentially saying that the DNA evidence is what matters, not the sundial, as though preemptively acknowledging that the sundial cannot carry the argumentative weight the show initially assigned to it. But the DNA evidence, as we have discussed, narrows the field to 5 people rather than 1. The eyelash belongs to a Simpson, not to Maggie specifically, to the Simpson family, which means the DNA points at Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie with equal force and cannot by itself distinguish between them. The combination of the sundial coincidence and the family-level DNA creates a case that is, at best, circumstantial. It is the kind of case that, in a real legal proceeding, would not be sufficient for conviction. It is the kind of case that, in a real investigation, would leave multiple viable suspects unexcluded. And there is the matter of Burns's last words before being shot, "Oh, it's you." That phrase is doing a lot of work in the mystery, and the show does not fully excavate what it implies. Oh, You carries a specific register. It is the register of recognition without surprise. Someone familiar, someone in your orbit. Burns barely registers Homer as an individual. Burns consistently fails to identify Homer by name despite years of direct contact. The idea that Burns would look at a baby he has had at most one or two marginal interactions with and say, "Oh, it's you," in that specific register of familiar recognition, that requires some explaining that the show does not provide. The phrase works better for someone Burns knows more clearly, someone in his professional orbit, someone he has interacted with enough to recognize at a glance. Smithers would generate that response. Homer would generate that response, particularly if the confrontation involved something Burns found unsurprising given Homer's recent emotional state. Marge would generate that response, particularly if Burns had retained any of the specific, slightly possessive regard he developed for her during her time working at the plant. The show gave us a clue that points more naturally at an adult with an established relationship with Burns than at a baby Burns barely knows. And then the show attributed the shooting to the baby. The most interesting reading of Burns's choice not to name an adult family member is that Burns was protecting someone, that he woke from his coma, assessed his situation, and made a deliberate decision about what to say and what not to say. Burns is a man whose entire life has been defined by strategic information management. Who knows, better than almost anyone in Springfield, the value of a carefully chosen silence and a carefully chosen disclosure. If Burns chose what to say when he named his shooter, then Maggie was not identified by the evidence. She was selected. Selected as the one person in Springfield who could be accused with certainty that the accusation would carry no legal consequence. The perfect outcome, someone who could take the designation and never be harmed by it. Chief Wiggum said it himself, with no apparent awareness of how damning the statement was. No jury in the world would convict a baby. He said this as though it were a comfortable resolution to the case, rather than a statement of why a baby is the ideal person to name when you want to close a case without consequence. Springfield closed the case on Maggie. The question of whether the case was actually solved is one that Springfield has decided not to ask. Frank Grimes and what Springfield does to clear-sighted people. There is a man named Frank Grimes, and his story may be the most important thing The Simpsons ever did, even though the show itself does not seem to have fully registered what it was saying. Frank Grimes appeared in a single episode in the 8th season. He was a man who had worked extraordinarily hard for everything he had ever achieved. His childhood was difficult. He had no advantages and made no excuses for having none. He studied. He earned his credentials through effort and sacrifice. He got a position at the Springfield nuclear power plant and took it seriously in the way that people take seriously the things they had to fight to obtain. And then he met Homer Simpson. The episode's premise is built around Frank Grimes's horror at Homer's existence. Not disgust, exactly horror. The specific, slow-building, increasingly desperate horror of a man who has followed the rules his entire life and worked harder than nearly anyone around him, watching someone who has done none of those things receive equal or better treatment at every turn. Homer sleeps at his desk. Homer eats during safety warnings. Homer has a trophy on his shelf from a nuclear disaster he somehow turned into a positive outcome. Homer has photos of encounters with celebrities and presidents. Frank Grimes tries to expose this. He challenges Homer to a children's model reactor competition, assuming that Homer will perform poorly and the contrast with a real professional will be obvious. Homer wins. Not because Homer is secretly capable, but because the system that operates in Springfield does not reward competence. It rewards the kind of comfortable, cheerful, unaware participation that Homer provides so naturally. Frank Grimes unravels. He starts imitating Homer doing exactly what Homer does, ignoring safety protocols, handling equipment carelessly. He grabs electrical wires without gloves, saying that he is Homer Simpson and does not need safety equipment, and he is electrocuted, and he dies. Frank Grimes died from trying to demonstrate how dangerous Homer's behavior actually was. At the funeral, Homer falls asleep and starts talking in his sleep. He says something cheerful and meaningless. The crowd laughs. The funeral for a man who died precisely because the world does not hold people like Homer accountable becomes, within moments, another occasion for the community to feel warmly toward Homer. Springfield did not learn anything from Frank Grimes. It could not. Learning the lesson Frank Grimes was trying to teach, would require the town to confront its entire relationship with the power plant, with Burns, with the comfortable arrangement that keeps the lights on at the cost of everything Frank Grimes was trying to protect. Frank Grimes was an outsider. He arrived in Springfield without the benefit of having grown up in its particular atmosphere, without the years of gradual exposure that have dimmed the critical faculties of everyone around him. He could see what they could not, because he had not been marinating in the same water for the same length of time. He came in from outside and saw Springfield clearly, in the way that an outsider always sees a thing more clearly than someone who has always been inside it. And Springfield killed him for seeing it. Not through any deliberate act, but the environment that allows Homer to exist the way he exists in Sector 7G is also an environment that is lethal to someone who tries to hold it to account. Frank Grimes could not survive in Springfield because Springfield is not built for people like Frank Grimes. It is built for people like Homer. Damaged, pliant, undemanding, grateful for the position regardless of the conditions. He is not a cautionary tale about ambition or resentment. He is a cautionary tale about clarity. In Springfield, clarity is fatal. Seeing things as they are is the most dangerous thing you can do. The deal between Abe and Burns. The revelation that Abe Simpson made a deal with Charles Montgomery Burns that Homer's guaranteed employment was the product of a negotiation between his father and the man who had destroyed his family is one of the show's darkest moments, and one that received less attention than it deserved when it aired. Let us think about what that deal actually was. Burns committed a crime. The show does not specify precisely what the crime was, which is a characteristic Simpsons gesture toward plausible deniability. The vagueness allows the audience to imagine the crime as whatever is most plausible, given what we know about Burns. Abe discovered the crime. And rather than reporting it, rather than seeking justice or accountability, Abe made a deal. Abe's silence in exchange for Homer's job security. Homer would always have a position at the plant, regardless of his performance. In return, Abe would say nothing about whatever Burns had done. This is, first and most obviously, a profound moral failure on Abe's part. He had information about a crime, and he sold his silence about it in exchange for a private benefit. The crime Burns committed was not addressed. It was buried. The only person who benefited was Homer, who received job security, and Abe, who presumably received whatever peace of mind came from having secured his son's future without having to confront anything directly. But the deal is also, looked at from a certain angle, deeply strange in a way that goes beyond simple moral failure. Why would Burns agree to it? Burns is a man with extraordinary resources, extraordinary legal representation, and a long history of operating above the normal constraints of accountability. A retired man knowing about a crime is not the most threatening situation Burns has ever been in. He has faced regulatory investigations, federal probes, congressional hearings, and countless individual attempts by Springfield residents to hold him accountable for various things, and he has navigated all of them. The most interesting answer is that Burns already knew what Homer was. He already knew the specific value of having Homer Simpson in Sector 7G. He already understood that a man of Homer's specific profile, damaged enough to be ineffective, desperate enough to be compliant, cognitively impaired enough to never see the larger picture, was exactly the kind of person Burns needed in that role. And the deal with Abe gave him a formal structure for what he had already calculated was strategically optimal. By agreeing to guarantee Homer's employment, Burns formalized the arrangement he would have wanted anyway. He did not sacrifice anything he valued. He simply converted a potential inconvenience into a contractual obligation that served his interests. Abe thought he was protecting Homer. Burns thought he was protecting his investment. They were both right, and Homer never knew. Homer has never known. Homer goes to work every day at the plant that destroyed his family, secured by a deal made between his father and the man who made the destruction necessary, guaranteed his position by an arrangement that had nothing to do with his qualifications and everything to do with the strategic calculations of two old men who saw in Homer something that Homer has never been able to see in himself. And the tragedy of it is that Homer's ignorance of all of this is not incidental. It is structural. Homer cannot know about the deal because knowing would require him to understand its implications, and understanding the implications would require him to see the architecture of his own situation clearly, and seeing clearly is what the radiation and the crayon and everything else about growing up in Burns's Springfield has made impossible for him. Homer is protected by a deal he cannot know about. Working in a role that serves the interests of the man he does not know has been shaping his life, guaranteed his position for reasons that have nothing to do with anything Homer has ever done or been. He shows up every day. He does his job badly, incompletely, sometimes catastrophically. He comes home, he sits on the couch, he loves his family, and the deal holds. The geography of memory and the geography of maps. There is a specific way that people talk about the town they grew up in when they are no longer in it, when they have moved away and returned to it only in memory, and in the occasional visit that confirms how much has changed and how much has stayed the same. There is a geography of memory that is not the geography of maps. The distances are different. The scale is personal rather than cartographic. The town you carry with you in your head is assembled from emotional rather than physical logic. The places that mattered are close to each other regardless of actual distance, and the places that did not matter disappear entirely from the mental map. Springfield is built from that kind of geography. Not the geography of any one place, but the geography of a feeling about a place, the American feeling, specifically, about the kind of town that most Americans either grew up in or carry in their imagination as the template community, the place that represents home in the general rather than the specific sense. The show understands this, and its understanding is what produces the geographic impossibility. You cannot locate Springfield precisely because you cannot precisely locate a feeling. You cannot GPS a memory. You cannot put a pin on a map at the exact coordinates of a sense of belonging. What you can do is describe the elements. Mountains that feel like the mountains of a road trip taken as a child. Ocean that feels like the first ocean you ever saw. Farmland that feels like flyover country, like the middle of the country. Forest that feels like the forests of childhood exploration, which were always slightly more wild and mysterious than they probably were in fact. Springfield's geography is assembled from the places that feel most like home to the broadest range of Americans, without belonging precisely to any of them. It is the feeling of home rendered in physical space. That is why it is impossible to find. You cannot find a feeling on a map. For the people who have grown up watching this show, Springfield is located, with great precision, in the past. It is located in the moment when the couch gag landed, and the theme music played, and you were young, and the world was contained enough to fit into the space of a half-hour comedy on a Sunday night. That is where Springfield is. That is the location the show has been maintaining for 36 years with extraordinary fidelity. The geographic impossibility is a consequence of trying to locate in physical space something that exists in temporal and emotional space. The show is not confused about where Springfield is. The show knows exactly where Springfield is. It is in the specific feeling of being young enough that a cartoon family on a television felt like company, felt like the world being explained through the lens of comedy, felt like belonging to something larger than your own immediate circumstances. You cannot draw that on a map, but you know exactly where it is. The quality of Springfield nights. There is a particular quality to the silence between midnight and 3 in the morning that has no real equivalent at any other hour. It is a silence that is different from evening silence, which still carries traces of the day traffic not yet fully stopped, houses still showing lights, the ambient evidence of people still awake somewhere nearby, and different from the pre-dawn silence, which has its own particular tension, the sense of the day about to begin. The silence between midnight and 3 is its own country. It belongs to no particular time. The day is thoroughly over, and the next one has not begun. And in that gap, in that interval that belongs fully to neither, there is a quality of suspension that is unlike any other moment in the cycle of hours. Springfield exists in that kind of suspension, permanently, across all 36 of its years, across all 788 of its episodes. Springfield exists in the space between the end and the beginning, frozen there, suspended there, as comfortable in its suspension as you might be right now, at whatever hour this is for you, letting these words settle into the quiet. The mysteries we have been through tonight are the texture of that suspension. They are the things that make it feel like something rather than like nothing. They are the evidence that Springfield's stillness is not emptiness but density, that the apparent unchanging surface of the town conceals a depth of things that have happened and continue to happen and have never quite resolved, into the clarity of something finished and filed away. Springfield is not empty. It is full. It is full of everything that has ever happened in it, every decision that was made and not revisited, every crime that was committed and not pursued, every truth that was spoken and then voted out of existence. All of it is still there. All of it persists in the amber of Springfield's eternal present, preserved the way things are preserved in dreams perfectly, without decay, exactly as they were at the moment of their occurrence. That is what makes it so easy to return to, the completeness of it, the way nothing in Springfield is ever fully gone. You can go back, any time, to any moment in the show's 36 years. You can find the episode where Mona came back, or the episode where Bart tried to call his father collect from a payphone, or the episode where Homer got a crayon removed from his brain and was briefly the person he might have been. You can find them. They are all still there. Nothing in Springfield is lost. Everything is held. Let that be a comfort, if it can be. The holding quality of this place, the way it maintains what it has received, the way time does not erode or revise or diminish the things that have been given to it, there is something in that which is, at this particular hour, genuinely restful. You have been in Springfield tonight. You have moved through its streets and its mysteries and its buried stories. You have sat with the things it cannot see and the things it will not say and the love underneath all of it, the damaged and patient and completely genuine love of a family that keeps finding its way home. And now it is time to let it go for tonight. Let Springfield drift to the back of your awareness, the way familiar things drift when you stop paying them direct attention. Let it become ambient. Let it become the background of whatever comes next for you in this quiet hour. The show will be there when you come back. The mysteries will be exactly where you left them. The family will be on the couch. Springfield always is.